The debt letter arrived before breakfast, folded with such care that it looked almost polite. Verity Elliston knew better. Nothing that came beneath a red seal from a London solicitor was ever polite to a family with 3 servants dismissed, 2 horses sold, and 1 silver tea service remaining only because her father could not bear to part with the last wedding gift her mother had touched. She found the letter on the small mahogany table in the hall of Elliston Cottage, beside a tray of cold toast and a chipped blue cup. The morning light in Hampshire had not yet reached the floorboards. It rested instead on the paper, thin and sharp, making the seal shine like a drop of blood. For one foolish second, Verity wished she had come downstairs later. Then she heard her father cough behind the closed parlor door, and the wish disappeared. She slipped the letter beneath the tea napkin before old Mrs. Armitage could enter from the kitchen and see what fresh humiliation had arrived. Poverty was bearable when it stayed inside cupboards, under mended hems, behind curtains drawn before visitors noticed how bare the windows had become. Poverty became cruel only when it learned to knock. Verity carried the tray into the parlor with both hands steady. The room was small by the measure of the houses she had once visited as a girl, yet it had kept its dignity in the way certain old ladies kept theirs, with faded silk, polished wood, and an air of refusing to explain itself. Her father sat near the hearth though the fire was low. Mr. Elias Elliston had been a handsome man once, and even now his profile held the remains of command. Time had thinned him. Worry had done the rest. He looked up too quickly when she entered, as though he had been caught in some private weakness. "You're awake early, Papa," Verity said, placing the tray where his hand could reach it. In speech, she allowed herself gentleness. In movement, she allowed herself nothing that looked like alarm. "Did the post come?" His eyes flicked toward the hall. It was enough. Verity poured his tea. "Only a circular from Winchester, I think." "Verity." His voice held the soft rebuke of a man who had taught his daughter honesty and now hated watching her practice mercy instead. She set down the teapot. "I saw the seal." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence was not empty. It was crowded with every bill delayed, every invitation declined, every neighborly kindness that had become unbearable because it was kindness. Mr. Elliston reached for the letter, but Verity kept her fingers on the napkin. "After tea," she said. "Bad news is less triumphant when it has to wait." His mouth moved as if he wished to smile, then failed. "Your mother used to say that." At the mention of her mother, Verity's free hand rose almost without thought to the narrow ribbon hidden beneath the bodice of her morning gown. Beneath the muslin lay an old brass key, no longer bright, rubbed smooth by years of touch. It opened her mother's escritoire, the little walnut desk in the corner that still smelled faintly of paper, lavender, and thyme. Mrs. Elliston had kept recipes there, birthday notes, a few locks of hair from Verity's infancy, and letters tied in blue thread. Nothing valuable. Nothing that could save a family. Yet Verity wore the key as if it could. "You must not look so grave when you think of her," her father said. "She would scold us both for making tragedy out of breakfast. Then I shall eat toast in her honor." Verity took a small piece and made herself swallow it. It tasted of ash. Outside, the lane was quiet, bordered by hedgerows just beginning to gather spring green. Elliston Cottage stood back from the road, modest but well kept, with climbing ivy that hid more cracks than it adorned. Once, there had been a groom in the stable, a maid for upstairs, a boy for the garden, and her mother's laughter moving through the rooms like music. Now there was Mrs. Armitage in the kitchen, old Ben for rough work twice a week, and Verity, who could balance household accounts, mend gloves, write a graceful letter, soothe a creditor, and still appear at church with her spine straight enough to silence pity. She had become very skilled at silence. Her father unfolded the letter at last. She watched his face rather than the page. That was how she knew the contents before he spoke. The small tightening beside his mouth. The breath held too long. The eyes lowering not in fear, but in shame. "How soon?" Verity asked. He folded the letter again, more carefully than it deserved. "Soon enough to be inconvenient. Papa." "A fortnight." The word entered the room and changed its size. The parlor seemed smaller. The low fire seemed colder. A fortnight was not time. It was a courtesy before ruin. It is the old claim, she asked. Revived, with interest. By whom? The letter names Price and Wetherell as agents only. The party behind them remains discreet. Discreet. Verity almost laughed. Cruelty always preferred good manners when it could afford them. Then we ask Mr. Havers to write again. He can demand proof of the claim. He has done so twice. Then he can do so a third time. My dear girl. Her father looked at her then, and the tenderness in his face frightened her more than the debt. There comes a moment when ink is only ink. Verity drew herself upright. And there comes a moment when surrender is only surrender. A faint sound broke the air outside. Not birds. Not Ben's cart. Wheels. Smooth wheels, turning at a pace that belonged not to farmers or tradesmen but to a carriage built for distance and consequence. Verity turned toward the window. Between the pale curtains, she saw a pair of dark horses coming up the lane, matched perfectly, their harness polished, their driver upright in a coat too fine for a country errand. Behind them rolled a black traveling carriage marked with a crest she did not recognize at once because she had never expected to see such a thing stop before their gate. Her father stood too quickly. The letter slipped from his hand onto the carpet. Papa! Verity moved to him, but his gaze remained fixed on the window. That is Calder-mere's crest. The name struck the room harder than the debt had done. Calder-mere. One of the great titles, old enough to be spoken with lowered voices by those who pretended not to care for rank. Verity had heard of the Duke in fragments, as one heard of distant storms. Sebastian Harcourt, Duke of Calder-mere. A man with estates in 3 counties, influence in Parliament, a fortune discussed by people who thought it vulgar to discuss money, and a reputation for settling difficult matters with elegant finality. He was not the sort of gentleman who visited forgotten cottages without reason. Do you know him? She asked. I knew his uncle a little, years ago. Mr. Elliston bent to retrieve the letter, but his hand was unsteady. Verity reached it first and tucked it beneath the account book on the side table. Did you write to him? No, that answer should have comforted her. It did not. The carriage stopped. A footman descended. Mrs. Armitage appeared in the hall, wiping her hands on her apron, her eyes wide with the terror of a servant who knew the front step had not been whitened that morning. Verity crossed to the looking-glass above the mantel. Her reflection looked back with 2 pale cheeks, brown hair pinned simply, and a gown that had been turned once at the cuffs with care no stranger should notice. She touched the ribbon at her throat beneath the fabric, feeling the old key press against her skin. Not valuable. Not useful. Still hers. Verity, her father said quietly, you need not remain. She turned from the glass. If a duke has come to our door, Papa, then whatever he wants has already entered this room. A knock sounded. Not loud. Not uncertain. 3 measured strikes, as if the person beyond the door knew that every house in England, grand or humble, must eventually open to power. Mrs. Armitage looked toward the parlor, helpless. Mr. Elliston straightened his coat. Verity lifted the tea tray, though there was no reason to lift it, and set it down again because her hands did not tremble and she wished to keep them that way. Show his grace in, her father called. The door opened. Cold spring air moved through the hall, carrying the scent of damp earth and leather. The footman entered first, then stepped aside. The man who followed seemed too tall for the cottage doorway, not because of height alone but because of the stillness around him. Sebastian Harcourt, Duke of Calder-mere, removed his hat with exact courtesy. He was dressed in dark traveling clothes cut with such restraint that only a fool would miss their expense. His hair was black, his eyes a clear grey, and his face held the composed severity of a man accustomed to being obeyed before he had raised his voice. Yet he did not look first at the worn carpet, the faded curtains, or the thin fire. He looked at Verity. Not long. Not rudely. Only once, with the sharp attention of someone who noticed what others passed over. Verity lowered into a curtsy. Her father bowed. Your Grace. Mr. Elliston. The Duke's voice was calm, deep, and without ornament. Forgive the intrusion. I would not have come without urgency. A duke's urgency is rarely a small matter, her father said. The corner of Sebastian's mouth changed almost imperceptibly. It was not a smile, but it suggested he understood courage when he heard it. "No," he said. "It is not." A second gentleman entered behind him, lean and pale, carrying a leather case polished by use. A secretary, Verity guessed. Or a solicitor's clerk. Either possibility made the air tighten. The Duke glanced toward her again. "Miss Elliston, I hope my arrival has not distressed you." It was a careful sentence. A lesser man would have assumed distress as his due. "Unexpected things are not always distressing, Your Grace," she said. "Only unexplained ones." This time, the silence was different. Her father looked down as if hiding alarm. The secretary paused with the leather case halfway to the table. The Duke's gaze remained on Verity, and something in it sharpened, not with offense but with interest. "Then I shall not delay the explanation." He turned to Mr. Elliston. "May I speak plainly?" "In this house," her father said, "plain speech is preferred, though not always enjoyed." "I require a wife," the Duke said. Verity did not move. The sentence was absurd, impossible, and yet spoken so evenly that the room seemed obliged to accept it as fact. The fire gave a small collapse in the grate. Somewhere in the hall, Mrs. Armitage drew in a breath and forgot to release it. Sebastian Harcourt placed one gloved hand upon the leather case his secretary had set on the table. "And I have reason to believe," he continued, "that an arrangement between our families may prevent a greater injury to yours." Verity felt the old key cold against her heart. Her father's face had gone very still. Outside, the grand carriage waited before the poor cottage as if wealth itself had come to call. The Duke opened the leather case and withdrew a folded paper. "Mr. Elliston," he said, "I have come with a proposal." The paper made no sound when the Duke laid it on the table, yet Verity felt as if something fragile had broken. It was not the paper itself. It was the care with which it had been prepared. Thick cream stock. Folded edges. A clean seal. Ink laid down by a clerk who had never wondered whether a woman could hear her own future being measured from the other side of a room. Sebastian Harcourt did not push the document forward at once. That restraint should have reassured her. Instead, it made the proposal feel more deliberate, more certain, more impossible to refuse. Mr. Elliston remained standing beside the hearth, one hand resting on the back of his chair. His face had settled into that grave courtesy Verity knew too well, the expression he used when a tradesman pressed for payment and he refused to let shame appear before a stranger. "A proposal of what nature, Your Grace?" he asked. The Duke glanced toward Verity. "One that concerns Miss Elliston directly. I would prefer she remain, if you permit it." The words were correct. Perfectly correct. They still struck Verity as astonishing. Men of rank often spoke over women with the polished ease of men crossing carpets. This Duke had at least noticed that she was not furniture. Her father turned to her. "Verity?" It was a question, not a command. She should have been grateful for that too. She was. Yet gratitude did not prevent the room from feeling suddenly airless. "I will remain," she said. The Duke inclined his head. His secretary opened the leather case fully and placed two more papers beside the first. "I shall be plain," Sebastian said. "My household requires stability. My name has recently been attached to certain expectations in London, most of them inconvenient and some of them false. A marriage made quietly, respectably, and without the interference of fashionable schemes would resolve several difficulties." Verity heard every word. She also heard what he had not said. He needed a duchess as another man might need a new carriage, sound horses, or a roof repaired before winter. Something necessary. Something useful. Her father's fingers tightened on the chair. "And you believe my daughter supplies this stability?" "I believe Miss Elliston's character recommends her." The Duke's eyes moved to Verity again. "Her family is respectable. Her position is gentle, though reduced. She is not entangled in court factions or ambitious households. She has not been trained to pursue a title at all costs." "That is almost a compliment," Verity said before she could stop herself. The secretary's gaze dropped to the case. Mr. Elliston closed his eyes for half a second. The Duke did not look offended. It was intended as one. "Then I thank you for the part that was not an inventory." Stillness entered the parlor. It settled over the cold toast, the faded curtains, the folded debt letter hidden beneath the account book. Sebastian studied her with that grave attention again. A lesser man might have smiled to soften the insult. He did not. "You are right to object," he said. "Practical language can become discourteous when applied to a person." Verity had no answer ready for that. She had expected arrogance. She had not expected correction. The Duke turned back to her father. "If Miss Elliston were willing, and if you approved, I would settle your outstanding claims immediately. Your present creditors would be satisfied. Elliston Cottage would remain in your possession for life. A jointure would be arranged for your daughter. Her personal allowance would be generous. Your household would be restored without delay." The words were not cruel. That was the worst of it. They were calm, sensible, and devastating. Verity saw the temptation before her father did. She saw the roof repaired, Mrs. Armitage paid properly, the account book closed without dread, her father asleep without coughing over numbers in candlelight. She saw herself dressed well enough that no one would pity the seams of her gown. She saw comfort. She saw rescue. Then she saw the invisible chain attached to it. Mr. Elliston looked at the papers but did not touch them. "You have been thorough. I do not enter serious matters carelessly." "No," her father said. "I can see that." Sebastian's voice lowered by a degree. "I am aware this is sudden. I am also aware that suddenness may be mistaken for disrespect. That is not my intention. Intention is a gentleman's private comfort," Mr. Elliston said. "Consequence is what other people must live with." The Duke absorbed the rebuke without movement. Verity felt something shift inside her. Pride, perhaps. Fear too. She had seen her father embarrassed, tired, cornered, and silent. She had never seen him small. Not once. Sebastian's secretary placed a final document on the table. This one bore a list of figures. Verity forced herself not to look away. There it was. The arithmetic of salvation. The price of peace, written so elegantly that it almost disguised itself as mercy. "Your Grace," she said, "have you come to ask me to marry you, or to ask my father what sum would make the question unnecessary?" The secretary's hand froze. Mr. Elliston turned sharply toward her, but the Duke answered before he could speak. "I have come to ask both of you whether a marriage might serve all parties honorably." "Serve," she repeated. "Yes. That is a word for tables, horses, and weather." A faint shadow crossed his face. "It is also a word for duty. Duty can be noble," she said. "It can also be a curtain drawn over convenience." For the first time, Sebastian looked away from her. Not in defeat. In thought. Verity should not have felt the small pulse of satisfaction that followed. It was dangerous to strike a duke and notice he could feel it. Mr. Elliston moved then. Slowly, with care, he took the uppermost paper from the table. He read only a few lines. Verity watched his face. He did not flinch at the size of the sum. That told her it was large. Very large. Large enough to end every debt, silence every creditor, and make every person who had pitied them suddenly remember invitations they had forgotten to send. Her father placed the paper back exactly where it had been. No, the word was soft. It was also complete. The Duke's expression did not change, but the room did. Even the secretary seemed to stop breathing. "May I ask your objection?" Sebastian said. "You may." Mr. Elliston touched the edge of the document with 2 fingers and pushed it back across the table. "My daughter needs a good man, not a rich one." Verity's throat tightened so swiftly that she had to look at the window. The hedgerow outside blurred. She had not wept when the debt letter arrived. She had not wept when gowns were turned, when servants left, when neighbors began speaking to her with careful kindness. But this nearly undid her. Not because her father had refused a fortune. Because he had refused to let her become one. Sebastian Harcourt went very still. The line had struck him. Verity saw it. It did not wound his pride in the ordinary way. It reached something beneath pride, somewhere colder and less defended. "You believe I am not a good man?" he asked. Mr. Elliston's gaze remained steady. I believe I do not know whether you are. Yet you know I am rich. Every person in England knows that, Your Grace. It is not a recommendation of character. It is merely a fact of circumstance. The secretary looked as though he would rather be standing in a field during a thunderstorm. Verity almost pitied him. Almost. The Duke remained composed, but his jaw had tightened. Poverty is also a circumstance, he said. An unforgiving one. I am familiar with its manners, Mr. Elliston replied. Then you know what refusal may cost. I do. And you would choose continued uncertainty for Miss Elliston over security as my Duchess? Her father's face changed then. Not anger. Pain. Do not mistake me. If my daughter loved a poor clerk, I would ask whether he was kind. If she loved a prince, I would ask the same. If she is to marry, she must be cherished as a soul, not acquired as a solution. Verity could not stay silent. Papa. Her voice betrayed her. Only a little, but enough. He looked at her, and his expression softened. My dear, I have failed you in many comforts. I will not fail you in this. Sebastian turned toward her. Miss Elliston, I have offended you. It was not a question. Yes, she said. Honesty felt like stepping onto thin ice. But not in the way you think. Tell me. The simplicity of the request made it harder. She touched the ribbon at her throat, feeling the old key beneath her gown. You came with papers before you came with a question. You arranged the answer before you asked whether I had one. The Duke looked down at the documents. For the first time, they seemed to trouble him. That was not my meaning. It was your method. Silence followed. A coal shifted in the grate and fell inward with a soft red sigh. Sebastian gathered the papers, but not in anger. He placed them back into the leather case himself rather than allowing the secretary to do it. The gesture was small. Verity noticed it anyway. Then my method was wrong, he said. Mr. Elliston's brows lifted slightly. Verity felt the same surprise and concealed it less well. The Duke closed the case. I will not press you today. Today? Verity asked. No, he met her eyes. Not today. Perhaps not ever. But there is something wrong about the claim against your father, and that matter does not require your consent to a marriage. It requires investigation. Mr. Elliston drew a slow breath. We did not request your help. No, Sebastian said. But if my arrival has increased your exposure, then I bear some responsibility for what follows. The words unsettled Verity more than the fortune had done. Responsibility was rarer than money. At the door, the Duke paused. Miss Elliston. She curtsied because form remained form, even when the world had shifted. Your Grace. I shall endeavor, he said, not to mistake efficiency for honor again. Then he was gone, taking the leather case, the secretary, and the smell of cold air with him. The carriage wheels rolled away from Elliston Cottage, leaving no visible mark on the lane. Inside the parlor, the debt letter still waited beneath the account book. The old key rested against Verity's heart. Her father sank slowly into his chair, suddenly older. Verity went to him and took his hand. Papa, she whispered, what have we refused? He looked toward the window where the Duke's carriage had disappeared. A fortune, he said. Then he pressed her fingers gently. And perhaps, if he is wise enough to learn from it, not the man. By the time Sebastian Harcourt reached Mayfair the following evening, the city had already done what London society did best. It had taken a private visit, removed its context, dressed it in malice, and sent it from drawing-room to drawing-room with a smile. Calder-mere House stood in Grosvenor Square with every window lit, its stone front calm beneath a sky the colour of smoke. Inside, servants moved as smoothly as clockwork. Silver gleamed. Fires burned high. No one who saw the great hall, the marble busts, or the portraits of dead Harcourts in powdered wigs would have guessed that the Duke had spent the last 24 hours thinking of a faded Hampshire parlour, a worn muslin gown, and a young woman who had accused him, correctly, of arranging her answer before he had asked for one. Sebastian disliked being wrong. He disliked it more when the proof of his error had brown eyes, steady hands, and a voice that did not rise even when wounded. Your Grace, his butler said, receiving his gloves. Lady Bexam's dinner begins at 9. Sebastian looked toward the long case clock. I am aware. Her ladyship sent a second card this afternoon. Of course she did. Polite traps usually came on engraved paper. He had almost refused the invitation. After the journey from Hampshire, he had intended to send for Price and Wetherell, question the debt claim, and determine who had revived it. Yet the second card had altered that plan. Lady Honoria Vale, Dowager Viscountess Bexam, did not insist upon a duke's presence unless she meant to use it. She had been widowed long enough to turn grief into authority and authority into a weapon no one could politely name. She owned no grand title herself, but she knew which doors opened because others feared being left outside hers. Sebastian arrived at Bexam House shortly after 9, dressed in black evening clothes and an expression that discouraged interruption. Lady Bexam received him beneath a chandelier bright enough to make every jewel in the room confess itself. She was a handsome woman in her late 40s, with silver-threaded dark hair, a powdered throat, and eyes that seemed warm until one noticed they were measuring the weakness in every person they rested upon. Beside her stood Lady Rosalind Renshaw, her niece, a fair young woman in pale blue silk, pretty, composed, and trained to look modest while being displayed. Your Grace, Lady Bexam said, offering her hand. London had begun to fear you had abandoned us for the country. London often fears what it invents, Sebastian replied. Her smile did not falter. How severe. But then, country air can sharpen a man. Lady Rosalind lowered her eyes with practiced grace. We are honored you came, Your Grace. Lady Rosalind. He bowed with exact courtesy and no encouragement. Around them, guests listened while pretending not to. Sebastian felt a tension gather. It moved through the room like a draught beneath a door. He had spent years in political dinners, negotiations, and committee rooms where men lied in voices trained at Eton. He knew when a subject had been prepared before he entered. He also knew when he was the subject. Dinner began with turtle soup, roasted fish, and the usual conversation about Parliament, the Prince Regent's circle, and whose daughter had danced too often with whose second son. Sebastian answered when required. He did not volunteer. Across the table, Lady Bexam guided the talk with the lightest touch. A name here. A pause there. A question placed where a blade would be too crude. I heard the roads toward Hampshire are tolerable this week, said Sir Malcolm Teague, a baronet with a laugh too eager for approval. Did your Grace find them so? Sebastian set down his wineglass. Tolerable enough. How fortunate. One hears you had pressing business in that direction. A fork chimed softly against porcelain. It was not loud. It was enough. Lady Bexam lowered her gaze to her plate, as though disappointed by indiscretion she had arranged. Sir Malcolm, she murmured, we must not pry into private benevolence. Private benevolence. Sebastian looked at her then. Slowly. Benevolence is rarely private once Lady Bexam has heard of it. The table stilled for half a breath. Lady Bexam gave a small laugh. You mistake me, Your Grace. I only meant that generosity to reduced families is admirable. So long as it is not misunderstood. A gentleman near the foot of the table leaned toward his neighbor and failed to lower his voice. Reduced families understand figures very well, I imagine. Another guest gave a short, nervous laugh. Especially when a ducal fortune is mentioned. Sebastian's hand did not tighten on the knife. He had learned long ago that visible anger was a gift to one's opponents. What family, he asked, is being discussed? Sir Malcolm blinked. No family of consequence. Then there should be no pleasure in discussing them. Silence spread, polished and uncomfortable. Lady Bexam reached for her wine. Your Grace is protective tonight. I am precise tonight. His eyes moved from face to face. If a lady's name is to be used at this table, it will be used respectfully. If her father's circumstances are to be mentioned, they will be mentioned truthfully. If neither can be managed, I recommend another subject. The words were not loud. They did not need to be. Rank did not always have to raise its voice. Sometimes it only had to stop pretending not to hear. Lady Rosalind looked down at her plate, her cheeks faintly colored. Lady Bexam watched Sebastian across the candles. Something cold and satisfied moved in her eyes. Not disappointment. Confirmation. She had wanted to see whether the Hampshire girl mattered enough to provoke him. Now she knew. Dessert had not yet been served when the note appeared. It came folded small, passed from hand to hand with the guilty grace of society mischief. Sebastian saw it travel from a young widow to Sir Malcolm, from Sir Malcolm to a plump matron, and from the matron to Lady Bexham, who did not open it at once. She let it rest beside her plate like a sleeping insect. "How vulgar," she said at last. "Anonymous notes are the ruin of decent conversation." "Then do not read it," Sebastian said. She sighed, almost maternally. "I fear several people already have. That is not an argument for continuing." "No. It is merely a fact." She unfolded the paper. Her lashes lifted. "Oh dear." Sebastian felt the room lean toward her. Lady Bexham's voice softened. "It concerns the very matter you wish left undiscussed." "Read one word aloud," Sebastian said, "and you will make yourself responsible for every consequence of it." The matron beside her gave a faint gasp. Lady Bexham's expression remained wounded, elegant, and false. "You would threaten a widow at her own table." "I would warn a hostess against turning her table into a marketplace." The word landed. Marketplace. Several guests looked away. Sir Malcolm flushed. Lady Bexham folded the note again, but not before Sebastian saw the line written across its center in a hand disguised poorly enough to be intentional. Elliston named his price and found the Duke willing. The sentence was short. It was also poison. Not because it was clever, but because it gave stupidity something easy to repeat. Sebastian thought of Mr. Elliston pushing the papers back. He thought of the old man's voice, controlled and aching. He thought of Verity standing beside the tea tray, wounded not by poverty but by the insult of being arranged. His original offer had given this lie its shape. That knowledge entered him cleanly. It did not excuse the liar. It condemned him too. Lady Bexham slipped the note beneath the edge of her plate. "Perhaps we should speak of music," she said. "Perhaps we should speak of handwriting," Sebastian replied. "Someone at this table has received a false note concerning a gentleman who is absent and a lady who has no means to defend herself here." "False?" Sir Malcolm asked before wisdom could stop him. Sebastian turned his gaze on him. "Yes. But surely, Your Grace, if there were papers, settlements, arrangements, there were papers," Sebastian said. "They were mine. The error was mine. The refusal was Mr. Elliston's. Any man who suggests he bargained for his daughter is either misled or beneath correction." The room went utterly quiet. A few seconds earlier, Miss Elliston had been a whisper. Now she was a boundary. Sebastian saw Lady Bexham understand the difference. Her smile returned, smaller than before. "How noble of you to defend them." "It is not nobility. It is accuracy. Accuracy can be costly. I can afford it." For the first time that evening, the line was crude. He knew it the moment he said it. Money again. Power again. The same old instinct reaching for the nearest weapon. Yet this time the weapon was not aimed at Verity. It was aimed at those who would price her. That did not make him good. It only made him awake. Dinner ended with less laughter than it had begun. In the withdrawing room, Lady Rosalind approached him while her aunt entertained a cluster of ladies near the pianoforte. "Your Grace," she said quietly, "my aunt does not always mean harm." Sebastian looked at the young woman. There was unease beneath her practiced sweetness. That is often said of people who cause it efficiently. Lady Rosalind's fingers tightened around her fan. "Miss Elliston. Is she truly so very wronged?" "Yes." The answer came without ornament. Lady Rosalind lowered her eyes. "Then I am sorry." It was the first honest sentence he had heard in that house. He inclined his head and left before Lady Bexham could reclaim him with farewell courtesy. Outside, the air was cold enough to clear the scent of candles and sugared fruit from his lungs. His carriage waited, lamps burning against the dark street. Sebastian paused on the steps while his footman opened the door. London glittered around him, full of windows, whispers, and rooms where a woman's name could be damaged before she had even been invited to defend it. He had thought himself efficient. He had thought himself generous. In Hampshire, a poor gentleman had told him wealth was not proof of worth. Tonight, London had shown him how wealth, badly used, could become a match held near dry paper. "Calder-mere House, Your Grace?" the footman asked. Sebastian stepped into the carriage. "No," the footman waited. "Hampshire," Sebastian said. "Now." The man hesitated only a fraction. "Tonight, Your Grace. Tonight." He looked once more toward the lit windows of Bexham House. Somewhere behind them, Lady Honoria Vale was already deciding which version of the evening would travel fastest by morning. Let her. He had a longer road and a more urgent apology. "And send a rider ahead to have fresh horses ready at Staines," he added. "We do not stop unless the team requires it." The door closed. The carriage lurched forward. As Mayfair slipped behind him, Sebastian rested one gloved hand against his knee and saw again the look in Verity Elliston's eyes when she had told him his method was wrong. He had believed the matter began with a proposal. He knew now that it had begun with an injury. And before another whisper reached her door, he meant to stand where he should have stood from the first. The Duke returned to Elliston Cottage before the village church bell had struck 8, and this time no leather case came with him. Verity saw the carriage from the upstairs landing, where she had been carrying a basin of warm water to her father's room. For one suspended second, she thought exhaustion had made a vision of memory. The same black carriage stood at the gate, the same matched horses steamed faintly in the pale morning air, and the same crest gleamed on the panel as if a piece of Mayfair had been set down among Hampshire hedges by mistake. Then the footman jumped down, and the illusion became fact. Her heart gave one hard beat. Not fear, exactly. Not hope either. Hope was too dangerous a word for a woman whose name might already be traveling faster than any carriage. She set the basin on the narrow table by the stair and touched the ribbon beneath her gown. The old key rested there, cool and familiar. Downstairs, Mrs. Armitage opened the door before the Duke could knock twice. Verity heard his voice in the hall, lower than she remembered, roughened by a night's travel. "Good morning. I apologize for the hour. Is Mr. Elliston well enough to receive me?" There was no command in it. That alone unsettled her. By the time Verity entered the parlor, her father had come down with his coat buttoned incorrectly and pride holding him upright where health did not. Sebastian Harcourt stood near the window, hat in hand, dark hair touched with damp from the morning mist. His face showed little fatigue, but the dust along his boots betrayed the journey. He turned when she entered. His eyes did not go to her gown, her loosened hair, or the plain apron she had forgotten to remove. They went first to her face. "Miss Elliston." She curtsied. "Your Grace. Hampshire has become a habit with you. An urgent one." Her father sank into his chair only after the Duke had taken the one opposite, and even then he did it as if sitting were a concession he disliked granting. "You have news," Mr. Elliston said. "I have warning." The word moved through the parlor more sharply than cold air. Verity remained standing beside the tea table. "From London?" "Yes." Sebastian looked at her, then at her father. "A rumor has begun." Mr. Elliston's mouth tightened. "About my daughter. And about you." He did not soften it, and because he did not soften it, Verity believed him. "It has been said that I offered a fortune for Miss Elliston's hand and that you asked for more." The room seemed to lose its walls. Verity had imagined whispers. She had imagined pity, laughter, perhaps some cruel invention about ambition. But the thought of her father's refusal being turned into greed struck with such force that she reached for the edge of the tea table before she meant to. A spoon rattled once against its saucer. Sebastian heard it. His gaze lowered to her hand, then returned to her face without comment. Mr. Elliston's voice was quiet. "Who said this?" It passed through Lady Bexham's table last night by way of an anonymous note. "Lady Honoria Vale," Verity said. She had never met the woman, yet the name felt unpleasantly smooth. "Dowager Viscountess Bexham," Sebastian confirmed. "She did not read the note aloud after I warned her not to. Others had already seen enough." "Enough," Verity repeated. The word tasted bitter. "Enough to make us filthy by breakfast." A silence followed. Her father looked at her with pain, but not correction. Sebastian stood very still. "I am sorry," he said. "It was not elaborate. It was not decorated with noble regret. It was better for that." Verity forced herself to release the table. "For the rumor, or for the shape of it?" His answer came after one breath. "Both." That breath mattered. She saw that it cost him something not to defend himself. "My visit gave the lie its bones," he said. "My offer gave it language. I cannot undo that by pretending innocence." Mr. Elliston leaned back, and the strain in his face deepened. "Your Grace, why have you come?" Sebastian reached inside his coat and withdrew no papers, only a sealed card. "My aunt, the Dowager Duchess of Calder-mere, is prepared to receive you both at Calder-mere House. If you choose to come to London under her protection, the matter can be met properly. With chaperonage. With witnesses. With no announcement of engagement and no private bargain." Verity stared at the card. There was no settlement figure. No signature line. No promise of comfort tied around her throat. Only a door, opened cautiously. "And if we refuse," she asked, "then I will still investigate the debt claim and the note. I will still contradict the rumor where I hear it. You owe me no obedience." The simplicity of that last sentence made the room feel less airless. Her father studied him. A duke rarely travels 50 miles overnight to tell a poor gentleman he owes nothing. Then perhaps a duke should travel more often. It was almost dry. Almost. Verity looked at him more carefully. He was the same man who had placed settlement papers on their table. He was also not standing in quite the same posture. Pride remained. Authority remained. But something in him had bent, not broken, and made room for shame. "London is not kind to women in my position," she said. "No, nor to men in Papa's. No, if we go, I will not be hidden in some back room while gentlemen decide what my name means." "I understand." "I doubt that." The words escaped softer than she intended. His eyes held hers. "Then teach me the terms." Her father gave a faint sound, half cough and half surprise. Verity felt heat rise in her cheeks, not from flattery. The Duke had not flattered her. He had done something far more dangerous. He had listened as though her answer mattered. She lifted her chin. "I will not be spoken for unless I ask it. I will not have my father treated as a dependent. I will not accept payment disguised as rescue. If your aunt receives us, it will be as guests, not as evidence in your defense." Sebastian bowed his head once. "Agreed." "You agree very quickly. I learn slowly. I prefer not to waste the moment when I do." That should not have softened her. It did. Only a little, and not enough to trust him completely, but enough to make distrust less simple. Before she could answer, a hard knock struck the front door. Not measured like a gentleman's visit. Not hesitant like a neighbor's call. It was the knock of someone who believed need had no right to privacy. Mrs. Armitage's footsteps hurried across the hall. A man's voice followed, carrying through the thin door before she could stop it. "Mr. Elliston is at home. I was told to collect today." Verity saw her father close his eyes. Just once. Then he opened them, and the old dignity returned like a candle forced to burn in a draught. Sebastian turned toward the hall. "Who is that?" "No one with whom you need concern yourself," Mr. Elliston said. "Papa," Verity whispered. The door opened wider. A narrow man in a brown coat stepped into the parlor without waiting to be invited, his hat tucked beneath his arm and a folded paper in his hand. He stopped when he saw the Duke, but only for a second. Men who carried other men's shame for payment learned to recover quickly. "Mr. Elliston," he said, "I have authority from Price and Wetherell to demand settlement or a written undertaking by noon." His eyes flicked toward Verity. It would be unfortunate if the matter required witnesses. The threat was mild. That made it uglier. It wore legal language like gloves over dirty hands. Sebastian moved before Verity's father could answer. Not quickly. Not dramatically. He simply stepped between the agent and the chair where Mr. Elliston sat today. The room altered around him. "Your name," the Duke said. The man swallowed. "Barker, Your Grace." "Mr. Barker, you entered a gentleman's parlor without invitation." Barker's fingers tightened around the paper. "I was conducting lawful business." "Then conduct it lawfully from the threshold after being received." "Your Grace, I meant no disrespect." "You meant pressure." "It is not the same thing, but it is near enough to disrespect that I advise you to retreat." Barker looked from the Duke to Mr. Elliston, then to Verity. "My instructions were particular." "From Price and Wetherell?" Sebastian asked. "Through them." "From whom?" Barker hesitated. That hesitation answered more than he knew. "I am not at liberty to say." Sebastian's voice dropped. "You are at liberty to leave." Barker bowed awkwardly. "Of course, Your Grace. I shall report that Mr. Elliston was unavailable. You shall report that Mr. Elliston was at home, that you were received improperly because you behaved improperly, and that future communications will be sent in writing to his solicitor. You will also report that any attempt to distress Miss Elliston at her father's door will be remembered by me personally." Barker went pale. No one had raised a voice. No one had needed to. He retreated with the paper still in his hand, nearly backing into Mrs. Armitage in the hall. The front door closed. The silence afterward was different from the silence after insult. It was the silence of a room that had witnessed power used carefully and did not know what to do with the relief. Mr. Elliston's hand trembled on the chair arm. Verity saw it and moved toward him, but Sebastian had already stepped away, leaving the path clear for her. That small retreat touched her more than the dismissal of Barker. He could have stood there wearing gratitude like a medal. Instead, he made room. She knelt beside her father. "Papa. I am well. You are not." His smile was faint. "Then I am almost well, which is the compromise left to older men." Verity pressed his hand. When she looked up, Sebastian was watching not with pity, but with an expression so controlled that she could not name what lay beneath it. Anger, perhaps. Not at them. That distinction mattered. "Mr. Elliston," he said, "I did not pay that man. I did not settle the debt. I will not do so behind your back." Her father's eyes lifted. "Thank you. But someone sent him here today because my visit made your household vulnerable. Or because someone wished us to look desperate," Verity said. Sebastian turned to her. "Yes." The agreement fell between them like a clue. Lady Bexham. Anonymous notes. A revived claim. A debt agent with particular instructions he could not name. Separate threads, yet already beginning to knot. Verity stood. "If we go to London, we go for the truth." "Yes," Sebastian said. "Not to be rescued." "No, and not to become convenient." His gaze held hers. "Never again, if I can help it." She wanted to distrust the promise. She had every reason. Yet the old key pressed against her heart, and for the first time since the debt letter had arrived, it felt less like a relic and more like a thing waiting to be used. By afternoon, Mrs. Armitage had packed what gowns could be made respectable. Mr. Elliston rested upstairs under protest. Verity stood alone in the parlor before her mother's escritoire. The walnut surface was scratched near the lock. Her mother had once said scratches were proof that useful things had lived. Verity drew the old key from beneath her gown and locked the little desk carefully. Whatever letters slept inside, whatever memories, whatever useless tenderness, they would wait. She tied the key again at her throat. When she stepped outside, the Duke's carriage stood ready, but Sebastian did not offer his hand until her father had been settled and the Dowager Duchess's companion, sent ahead from a nearby posting inn, had taken her place inside to satisfy propriety. Only then did he look at Verity. "Miss Elliston." She placed her gloved hand in his for the briefest necessary moment. His grasp was steady and immediately released. A safe choice, not a claim. As the carriage turned toward London, Elliston Cottage grew smaller behind them, its ivy-covered walls holding their secrets in the pale afternoon light. Verity did not look away until the lane bent and the house disappeared. Then she faced forward, toward scandal, toward society, toward the woman who had tried to place a price upon her name. The Duke sat opposite, silent, watchful, and no longer certain he knew how to save her. That, Verity thought, might be the first useful thing about him. Calder-mere House did not receive Verity Elliston as a guest so much as it examined her. The moment the carriage stopped before the great stone residence in Grosvenor Square, every polished surface seemed to know what her hem concealed, what her gloves had cost to mend, and how many times her father had pretended not to see her turn a gown so it might survive another season. The front door opened before the footman could knock. Light spilled down the steps. Servants in livery stood with disciplined faces, and beyond them rose a hall so grand that Verity felt the full absurdity of bringing a Hampshire cottage into it in the shape of herself. Her father leaned on Sebastian's arm only for the descent from the carriage, and even then he did it with visible reluctance. The Dowager Duchess's companion, Mrs. Vale, stepped down next and gave Verity a small approving nod, as if the rules of propriety had been satisfied and could now stop hovering over them like an anxious aunt. Sebastian offered his hand last. Verity placed her gloved fingers on his palm for the space of one breath. He did not close his hand around hers. He gave support, then released her at once. That restraint steadied her more than any gallantry could have done. Inside, the marble floor reflected candlelight in long pale streaks. Portraits watched from the walls, generations of Harcourts with severe mouths and untroubled fortunes. Verity kept her chin level. She would not apologize to dead dukes for the thinness of her purse. A tall woman in deep violet silk waited near the staircase, one hand resting on the head of a silver cane that looked decorative until one saw the authority with which she held it. Her hair was white, her eyes dark, and her posture made age seem like another form of rank. Sebastian bowed. "Aunt Augusta." The Dowager Duchess of Calder-mere looked first at him, then at Mr. Elliston, and lastly at Verity. Not rudely. Not kindly either. Her gaze was an inventory, but not the Duke's first kind of inventory. It did not ask what Verity could be used for. It asked whether she would survive. "Miss Elliston," she said. "You have had an unpleasant journey." "Only the last few miles, Your Grace," Verity replied. "London always seems to wish one to know it has been approached." The Dowager's mouth did not smile. Her eyes did. "Good. You are not foolish." Mr. Elliston gave a soft cough that might have hidden amusement. Sebastian looked away, but not before Verity saw the faintest shift at the corner of his mouth. The Dowager extended her hand. "Mr. Elliston, you will be shown to the Blue Chamber. My physician may call, if you do not object. He is discreet and tolerably competent, which is more than one can say of most men who carry bottles." "Your Grace is generous," Mr. Elliston said. "No. I am practical. Generosity wastes motion." Her gaze returned to Verity. "You will have the Rose Chamber beside Mrs. Vale. You will receive no one alone. You will answer no impertinent questions in corridors. You will not thank me excessively, because I dislike it." Verity curtsied. "Then I shall thank you once, Your Grace, and do my best not to offend your preferences." "You will offend someone's preferences before luncheon. See that they are the correct persons." It was the first sentence since leaving Hampshire that made Verity want to laugh. She did not, but something in her chest eased. Calder-mere House did not become less intimidating. It became navigable. The next morning, London arrived in the form of calling cards. They came on silver trays, in gloved hands, beneath murmured announcements. "Lady Markham. Mrs. Penrose. The Honourable Miss Draycott." 2 cards from women who had never acknowledged Verity's existence when she had last been in London as a quiet girl of 17, standing behind wealthier cousins at assemblies. Now they came because scandal had done what modest virtue never could. It had made her interesting. The Dowager Duchess held court in the front drawing-room, a pale green chamber filled with gilt chairs, high mirrors, and a tea service so flawless that Verity feared her reflection might look poorer in it. She sat near the Dowager, not hidden, not centered. Sebastian stood by the mantel, outwardly at ease, though Verity had begun to understand that his stillness was rarely ease. It was attention under command. Mr. Elliston remained upstairs by firm order of the Dowager, who had informed him that pride was not a medical treatment. "Remember," the Dowager said quietly as the first visitors were announced, "silence may be dignity, but it is not always defense." "Am I expected to defend myself today?" Verity asked. "My dear, in London one defends oneself by entering the room. The first calls were cautious. A few ladies offered sympathy so polished it had no warmth beneath it. One asked whether Hampshire air had agreed with Verity. Another observed that sudden elevation could be disorienting, as though Verity had climbed upon a chair and might fall off if startled. Verity answered with courtesy, neither grateful nor sharp. Sebastian did not rescue her. She noticed. More importantly, she noticed that he wanted to. His hand once shifted against the mantel when Lady Markham mentioned families fortunate in their connections. Verity looked toward him before he spoke. He stopped. The small obedience startled them both. Then Lady Honoria Vale, Dowager Viscountess Bexham, was announced. The room changed before she entered. Women adjusted their fans. Conversation thinned. Even the Dowager Duchess lifted her chin by a fraction, as if an old chess opponent had touched the board. Lady Bexham came in wearing dove-grey silk, pearls at her throat, and an expression of sympathetic concern so exquisite it should have been framed and distrusted. Lady Rosalind Renshaw followed her, lovely in pale yellow, with unease tucked carefully behind her lashes. "Duchess," Lady Bexham said, curtsying. "How good of you to receive callers so soon after opening your house to guests." The Dowager's smile was thin. "I receive callers when I wish to know what they are carrying." "How formidable." Lady Bexham turned to Sebastian. "Your Grace. You look restored from your journey." "Do I?" "Quite. Country errands can be so fatiguing." Her gaze moved to Verity. "Miss Elliston, I am charmed at last. London has heard your name with such frequency that one begins to feel acquainted before introduction." Verity rose and curtsied. "Then I must hope London has a better memory for truth than it has for names." A fan snapped open somewhere across the room. Lady Bexham's smile remained. "Truth is rarely a simple creature, is it? It wears so many gowns depending on who has paid for the fabric." Sebastian's gaze sharpened. Verity felt it, as surely as if he had stepped in front of her. But she had asked not to be spoken for. She would not retreat at the first cut. "That may be so," she said. "Though I have found Fossard usually dresses more expensively. It needs the assistance." The Dowager Duchess made a small sound into her teacup. Lady Rosalind looked down quickly, but not before Verity caught the flicker of unwilling amusement in her face. Lady Bexham tilted her head. "You have spirit. Reduced circumstances often produce that. One must admire necessity when it makes young women visible." There it was. Not a slap. A pin beneath the glove. Verity felt the heat of it in her cheeks, but she did not lower her eyes. "Reduced circumstances also produce arithmetic, Lady Bexham. One learns to count what matters and what merely shines." The room went still enough for the clink of a teaspoon to sound important. Sebastian's hand relaxed on the mantel. Not because the danger had passed. Because Verity had met it standing. Lady Bexham's eyes cooled. "How wise. I hope you will bring that wisdom to my charity musicale tomorrow evening. I collect subscriptions for distressed gentlewomen. Your perspective would be most affecting." The insult was so elegantly packaged that several ladies smiled before they understood it. Verity understood at once. Lady Bexham wished to place her on display among women with purses open and curiosity sharpened. The poor gentlewoman beneath charitable lamps. The rumoured bargain in a room arranged for pity. Sebastian moved one step from the mantel. "Lady Bexham," he said. Verity turned her head slightly. "Not much. Enough." He stopped again. This time, his silence was not uncertainty. It was trust, offered with visible effort. Verity faced Lady Bexham. "You are kind to invite me. Then you will come?" "If Her Grace approves and my father's health permits it, yes." Lady Bexham's smile brightened with victory. Verity let her have the expression. It was not the same as the thing itself. "Excellent," Lady Bexham said. "London will be eager to hear what Miss Elliston truly cost." The room froze. Even Lady Rosalind's face lost colour. The words had been spoken lightly, almost laughingly, but they had gone too far. The Dowager Duchess set down her cup. Sebastian's gaze turned hard enough to make the air feel colder. Verity felt the old wound open. Not because she believed the insult. Because it had found the exact place where her father's love had stood between her and the world. She drew one breath. "Nothing, Lady Bexham," she said. Her voice was quiet, and that made it carry. "No honest person could afford me, and no dishonest person could keep me." The Dowager Duchess looked at Verity then, fully and without disguise. It was not approval alone. It was recognition. Lady Bexham dipped her head, still smiling, though the smile had become a blade returned to its sheath. Tomorrow evening, then. When she left, conversation did not resume at once. It had to be rebuilt, piece by careful piece. Verity sat down only when the Dowager touched the chair beside her with 2 fingers. Sebastian crossed the room after the last caller had gone. He did not praise her as if she were a child who had recited well. He did not apologize for a wound he had not made. He simply stood near enough for her to know he was there and far enough not to claim the victory. "You did not interrupt," she said. "No, was it difficult?" "Very." Despite herself, Verity looked up. His expression was grave, but there was something almost human beneath it. "Then thank you," she said. "For the difficulty." The Dowager Duchess rose with her cane. "Do not grow sentimental in my drawing room. It damages the furniture." But as she passed Verity, she paused. "Wear the grey silk tomorrow. Not the brown." Verity glanced down at her gown. "I do not possess grey silk, Your Grace." "You do now." Then the Dowager left before gratitude could offend her. Sebastian remained by the tea table, watching Verity as if the morning had altered some private conclusion. Outside, London rolled on with its carriages, bells, and whispers. Inside Calder-mere House, Verity touched the hidden key at her throat and understood that tomorrow would not be a concert. It would be a stage. And Lady Bexham had already chosen the place where she meant to make her bleed. The grey silk made Verity look less like a poor relation and more like a question London had not yet answered. The Dowager Duchess had sent it to her chamber without ceremony, along with gloves, a modest pearl comb, and a note that read only, "Wear dignity as if it were inherited." Verity had almost smiled at that, then nearly wept, then done neither because Mrs. Vale was fastening the gown and pretending not to notice. By the time the Calder-mere carriage stopped before Lady Bexham's townhouse, Verity had trained her face into calm. The house was bright from every window, its music room prepared for charity with all the tenderness of a stage set. Candles trembled in mirrored sconces. A harp stood near the pianoforte. A table near the entrance held a silver bowl for subscriptions to distressed gentlewomen, and Verity understood at once that Lady Bexham had placed it there for her to pass. Not beside the door. Not discreetly near the hostess. Directly in the path, so that every guest might think of money before looking at Miss Elliston. Sebastian saw it too. His gaze paused on the bowl, then moved to her. He said nothing. That silence was not neglect. It was a question. Verity answered it by walking forward. She removed a small coin from her reticule, the kind of coin a woman in her position should have kept, and placed it in the bowl without lowering her eyes. The sound was soft, almost swallowed by conversation. Yet Lady Bexham heard it. She approached in amber silk, her smile already arranged. "Miss Elliston, how generous. We must all give according to our means, mustn't we?" Verity drew off her glove finger by finger. "According to conscience, I hope. Means are often less reliable." A faint ripple moved through the nearest ladies. Lady Bexham's smile sharpened. "How very philosophical. Your Grace, your guest improves every room she enters." Sebastian bowed with cold courtesy. "Then Lady Bexham is fortunate tonight." Lady Rosalind stood just behind her aunt, pale and uneasy in white muslin. She looked at Verity as though she wanted to speak and had been trained not to. Before anything more could pass between them, the first song began. Conversation settled into murmurs, fans, and watchful glances. Verity sat beside Mrs. Vale in the second row, close enough to be visible, not close enough to be honored. The Dowager Duchess had chosen to sit near the front, where no one could pretend she was not observing everything. Sebastian remained at the side of the room. He was not near Verity. He was not far either. The arrangement would have satisfied a chaperone and irritated an enemy. The soprano sang an Italian air with more precision than feeling. Verity tried to listen. Instead, she felt a tension touching her like cold fingertips. A whisper began near the harp. It passed behind a fan, crossed to a gentleman in a green waistcoat, then returned to the ladies near the subscription table. No one said her name aloud. That made it worse. Spoken cruelty had edges. Whispered cruelty became air. During the interval, tea was served in the adjoining drawing room. Verity accepted a cup she did not want and held it because it gave her hands an occupation. A matron in lavender approached with two younger women trailing behind her like ribbons. "Miss Elliston," she said, "I am Mrs. Penrose. We met yesterday, though one hardly meets anyone properly in a crowd. I remember you, Do you? How kind. I have such an admiration for young women who keep composure under unusual circumstances." "Composure is easier than explanation," Verity said. Mrs. Penrose blinked. One of the younger women hid a smile. Then Sir Malcolm Teague appeared with a folded paper between two fingers and the bright, foolish look of a man who enjoyed importance more than accuracy. "Lady Bexham," he called softly, though not softly enough. "This has found its way to me. I fear it concerns your charitable interest in distressed gentlewomen." Lady Bexham turned as though surprised by the interruption. She was a gifted actress. Verity knew it then with an animal certainty. The room felt suddenly arranged around one small folded page. Lady Bexham took it but did not open it. "Sir Malcolm, if this is another anonymous absurdity, I beg you to spare us. Not anonymous this time, I think." His gaze slid toward Verity and then away. "It bears a name." Sebastian moved from the wall. Not far. Only enough that the candlelight touched the sharp line of his face. "Whose name?" Sir Malcolm looked at Lady Bexham, seeking permission where he should have sought sense. She unfolded the paper with visible reluctance. Her eyes moved over it. Her expression changed by careful degrees. Concern. Pain. Moral disappointment. Verity's pulse slowed in the dreadful way it sometimes did before bad news struck fully. "I cannot," Lady Bexham murmured. "This is too unfortunate." The room leaned inward. The Dowager Duchess rose from her chair without hurry. Her cane touched the floor once. "If it is unfortunate, Honoria, perhaps do not make it theatrical." Lady Bexham coloured faintly. "Duchess, I assure you, I have no wish to distress anyone." "Then you are behaving against your wishes with remarkable commitment." A few faces turned down. Sebastian's mouth did not move, but his eyes warmed for the space of a heartbeat before hardening again. Lady Bexham sighed. "It appears to be a copy of a letter from Mr. Elliston to an intermediary. It refers to His Grace's visit. It refers to settlement terms." Verity heard the words as if from down a long corridor. Mr. Elliston. Letter. Settlement. The teacup in her hand remained steady. She was proud of that. It was a small, useless triumph, but it was hers. Sebastian stepped forward. "Give it to me. Your Grace, I don't think that is clear. Give it to me." His voice had not risen. The command in it made Sir Malcolm take a step back, though it had not been addressed to him. Lady Bexham held the page just beyond surrender. "If the matter is false, surely light is the best remedy. Light is not gossip held over a candle. But Miss Elliston herself may wish to correct it." Verity looked at her then. Truly looked. Lady Bexham was not merely cruel. Cruel people enjoyed pain. Lady Bexham enjoyed arrangement. She liked placing souls on squares and calling the board society. "I cannot correct what I have not seen," Verity said. Lady Bexham turned the page enough for her to read several lines. Not all. Just enough. The writing was similar to her father's, though heavier, less patient. The words struck harder than the hand. "In exchange for my daughter's acceptance, a proper recognition of her market value must be made." Verity's breath stopped. Not because she believed it. Because someone had known exactly where to cut. Her father's dignity had been the one clean thing in all this, and now they had dragged it into a room scented with roses and candle wax to be examined by strangers. Sebastian took one step toward her, then stopped. She felt the effort of it. He was honoring the boundary she had drawn, even while every instinct in him urged otherwise. "Miss Elliston," he said quietly, "do you know this hand?" The room waited for collapse. Tears would have pleased some of them. Anger would have satisfied the rest. Verity looked again at the fragment. The slant was near. The shape of the capital E was almost right. But her father would never have written market value. He disliked the word value when applied to anything living. Even as a child, when she had asked whether a mare was valuable, he had told her, "No creature's worth begins with its price." Verity lifted her eyes. "I know the man." The answer moved through the room in a line of confusion. Sebastian's expression changed. Not relief, not exactly. Recognition. He turned to Lady Bexham. "The letter will be examined." Lady Bexham folded it at once. "The original is not mine to release." "Then release the name of the person who holds it." "I gave my word." The Dowager Duchess laughed once. It was not a pleasant sound. "How selective your honor has become." Sir Malcolm muttered, "Surely if there is nothing to hide." Sebastian looked at him. "Finish that sentence only if you are prepared to attach your name to the accusation." Sir Malcolm shut his mouth. Mrs. Penrose drew her daughters backward. "Not far. Far enough to be noticed." Another woman whispered that Lady Rosalind was the more suitable connection after all. Verity heard it. So did Sebastian. So did Lady Rosalind, whose face went white with shame she had not earned. Lady Bexham lowered her voice. "Your Grace, I only wish to spare you a grave mistake." "No," Sebastian said. "You wish to make one convenient. A woman who brings such questions into your house will not strengthen it. Miss Elliston did not bring the question. You did." Silence fell, full and sharp. For a second, Verity could almost breathe. Then Lady Bexham smiled, and the danger returned. "Then I shall say no more tonight. Music should soothe us. We will allow proper persons to judge proper documents in proper time." Proper. The word closed like a gate. She had the alleged original. She had the room. She had the patience of a woman who knew scandal did not need proof if repeated gently enough. The musicale resumed, though no one listened. Verity sat through the final song with her hands folded and her heart burning cold. When at last the guests began to leave, Lady Rosalind came near while her aunt spoke to an elderly countess. "Miss Elliston," she whispered, "I'm sorry. I didn't know." Verity turned to her. The girl's distress was real. So was her helplessness. "Then remember that not knowing is not the same as not seeing." Lady Rosalind flinched, but she nodded. Outside, the night air felt almost clean. Sebastian escorted Verity and Mrs. Vale to the carriage under the Dowager's unsparing supervision. He did not touch Verity except to hand her in, and even then he released her as soon as she was steady. Before he closed the carriage door, he said, "I believed you." Verity looked at him through the dim light. "Before proof?" "Yes." She should have thanked him. Instead, she told the truth. Belief is not enough if the lie travels faster. His jaw tightened. "Then we will find the original." The carriage pulled away from Bexham House. Behind them, candles still burned in the music room where her father's name had been made into entertainment. Verity pressed her gloved fingers against the place where the old key lay hidden. For the first time, she wondered not what memories her mother's desk contained, but what evidence. And somewhere in London, Lady Bexham was keeping back a letter she had no right to possess. By morning, London had learned to repeat the lie more beautifully. It appeared first on a narrow society sheet folded beneath the breakfast tray at Calder-mere House, printed in the sly language that ruined reputations while pretending to protect them. No name was given in full. None was needed. A certain powerful nobleman, recently observed in the Hampshire countryside, was said to have found that even modest virtue may acquire a price when misfortune presses hard enough. A gentleman of reduced estate, the sheet continued, had allegedly discovered his daughter's value only after a ducal purse was opened. Verity read the lines once. Then she laid the paper flat beside her untouched tea and looked at the window because the room had become too crowded with air. The breakfast parlour was quiet except for the faint clink of the Dowager Duchess's cup. Mrs. Vale sat near the sideboard, stiff with offended propriety. Sebastian stood by the hearth with the society sheet in his hand, his face so still that it frightened Verity more than anger would have done. "This is not merely gossip," the Dowager said. "This is placement." Verity turned back. Placement. Someone wanted it where hostesses would see it before they dressed for calls. The Dowager's voice was dry, but her eyes were sharp. "By noon, half of Mayfair will have decided whether to pity you, avoid you, or invite you only to observe how well you bleed." "Aunt," Sebastian said. "Do not soften it on my account," Verity said. "I would rather hear the knife described accurately." His gaze moved to her. Something in it changed, pained and admiring at once. She did not want admiration. She wanted her father's name clean. The printed words had not merely wounded her. They had reached across 50 miles of hedgerows and struck the one man who had refused comfort rather than make her a bargain. That was the cruelty of it. The lie had found the purest thing and put a stain upon it. "Where is Papa?" she asked. "Still resting?" Mrs. Vale looked toward the door. "I believe so, Miss Elliston." The words had barely left her mouth when a footman entered, pale beneath his training. "Your Grace." Sebastian turned. "What is it?" "Mr. Elliston has arrived." Verity stood so quickly that her chair scraped the floor. "Arrived? Here?" "At the front entrance, miss. He came in a hired carriage. He insisted upon asking for you before we could send word upstairs." For one heartbeat, no one moved. Then Verity was already crossing the room. Sebastian reached the door before her, not to block her path, but to open it. She noticed even through fear. They descended together, the Dowager following with her cane striking the marble in measured taps. The great hall below seemed brighter than it had any right to be. Several callers had already arrived and lingered near the entrance, their cards not yet presented. Lady Markham stood with her daughter. Mrs. Penrose was removing her gloves. Two gentlemen near the door turned with unconcealed curiosity as Mr. Elliston stepped inside from the cold. He looked smaller in the vast hall, and that sight nearly broke Verity. His coat was brushed, his cravat properly tied, his hat held with old-fashioned dignity. Yet his face was grey with exhaustion from the journey, and one hand pressed lightly against his side as if he could hold himself together by will alone. "Papa." Verity crossed the marble before propriety could slow her. He tried to smile. "My dear, I thought it best to come at once. You should not have travelled. A father should be present when his daughter is slandered." The callers heard. Of course they heard. London always heard what was painful. A murmur moved near the door. Mrs. Penrose lowered her eyes with an expression that might have been sympathy or calculation. Mr. Elliston turned his head slightly and saw the watchers. He understood at once. Verity saw the understanding pass through him like a shadow. His shoulders straightened. That effort cost him. "Mr. Elliston," Sebastian said, coming to his side. "You are welcome in my house. Your Grace." Her father attempted a bow. The movement was small, but his breath caught. Verity reached him first, her hand at his arm. Sebastian moved at the same instant, then stopped half a step away, leaving her room to support her father without making a spectacle of it. The restraint hurt to see. It helped more. "I am well," Mr. Elliston said. "No," Verity whispered. "You are proud. It is not the same thing." A faint smile touched his mouth. "You sound like your mother." Then his face tightened, and the color left him fully. Sebastian acted without drama. "Bring a chair," he said to the nearest footman. "Now." The command moved through the hall like a bell. A chair appeared. Mr. Elliston sat before he could refuse. The Dowager took position beside him, her violet silk a shield against the curious. "Lady Markham," she said without looking away from Mr. Elliston, "if you have come to call, you may leave your card. If you have come to stare, you may leave faster." Lady Markham flushed. Mrs. Penrose gathered her daughter at once. The gentleman remembered urgent business. Within moments, the hall emptied of everyone who did not belong. That was the first mercy of the morning. It was not enough. Mr. Elliston's fingers closed around Verity's. "I saw the paper at the posting inn," he said. "Someone had left it open on purpose." "Do not speak of it now," Verity said. "I must." His voice lowered. "My dear, I did not write such words. I know. I would never have allowed even the thought of them. I know." He searched her face as if the assurance were medicine. Then he looked at Sebastian. "Your Grace, if there is any rumor that I sought to profit from my daughter's distress, I ask you to contradict it wherever your word carries weight." Sebastian's expression altered. The request was humble in form, but not in spirit. It asked the Duke to use what he had and to use it rightly. "I have already begun," Sebastian said. "I will do more." Mr. Elliston nodded, then closed his eyes as another wave of weakness passed over him. Verity felt panic rise, swift and hot. The dowager touched her wrist. "He needs rest, not terror. We have a physician who knows the difference between illness and gossip." "I don't need a physician," Mr. Elliston murmured. "Excellent," the dowager said. "Then you may tell him so yourself after he has climbed the stairs for no purpose." Sebastian looked to the footman. "The blue chamber." Carefully. Mr. Elliston began to protest, but Verity bent close. "Please, Papa. For me." That ended it. He allowed himself to be helped, not by pity but by love. Verity walked beside him until the staircase, where Sebastian offered his arm with such formal respect that her father could accept it as courtesy rather than surrender. The old man took it. In the shadow of the staircase, as the others turned upward, he caught Verity's hand once more. His fingers were cold. "The first letter," he said, so quietly that only she heard. "Your mother kept the first letter." Verity stilled. "What letter?" His brow tightened, as if memory and fatigue fought for the same small ground. "In her desk. The old correspondence. She never trusted Honoria Vale." Then Mrs. Vale urged gently from above, and the moment broke. Verity stood at the foot of the stairs with the words opening inside her like a locked door. Her mother. The escritoire. Lady Bexham. The old key beneath her gown seemed suddenly heavier, no longer a keepsake warmed by skin, but a thing with purpose. Sebastian descended after the footman had taken her father safely toward the blue chamber. He found her still beside the banister. "What did he say?" he asked. Verity looked toward the empty hall, where a few minutes earlier London had watched her father nearly collapse beneath a lie. The humiliation remained in the air, but something else had entered with it. A thread. A direction. "He said my mother kept the first letter." Sebastian's eyes sharpened. "From Lady Bexham?" He said she never trusted her. The name hung between them. In the breakfast parlor, the society sheet still waited with its polished poison. Upstairs, her father lay exhausted because he had tried to defend her before strangers who would have enjoyed seeing him fail. Verity felt grief, rage, fear, and a clarity so cold it steadied her. "I have endured enough," she said. Not patiently. Quietly. "There is a difference." Sebastian did not answer. He seemed to understand that this was not a moment for command. "I need to return to Hampshire," she said. "To the escritoire." "You should not travel alone." "I did not say alone. I said I need to go." The faintest breath moved through him. It might have been approval. It might have been worry. "Then we will arrange proper escort. No engagement notice. No settlement. No rescue dressed as ownership." No, his answer came at once. "This time, Miss Elliston, you lead me to the truth." She looked at him then, truly looked, and saw the effort it cost a man built for command to offer himself as support. It did not erase what he had done wrong. It did not heal the mourning. But it opened a narrow path through both. Upstairs, a door closed softly. Outside, carriage wheels passed along Grosvenor Square, carrying gossip toward other rooms. Verity drew the old key from beneath her gown and held it in her palm. The brass had dulled with years of touch, but in the light from the high windows, one edge still shone. Her mother's desk waited in Hampshire. Lady Bexham had an original letter she refused to release. Her father's name had been dragged through London. Verity closed her fingers around the key. "Then let us find what she feared," she said. The message from Lady Bexham arrived before the physician had left Mr. Elliston's room. It came on thick paper scented faintly of violets, folded with that same elegant cruelty Verity had begun to recognize as a kind of signature. The Dowager Duchess read it first in the upstairs sitting room, where Verity had been waiting with cold tea and a courage that had grown too tired to sit politely. Sebastian stood near the window, his face turned toward Grosvenor Square, but every line of him listened. Honoria has invited select friends to a private assembly tomorrow evening, the Dowager said. How charitable of her, Verity replied. Her voice sounded calm. She was beginning to understand how calm could become another form of exhaustion. The Dowager's mouth tightened. She writes that, for the sake of all parties, the original letter will be shown to persons of sound judgment. Sebastian turned from the window. She has no intention of showing anything. She intends to make an accusation look like procedure. Yes, the Dowager said. And if we decline to attend, she will say we fear the document. If we attend, she will arrange the room before we cross the threshold. Verity looked toward the closed bedchamber door. Behind it, her father slept under protest, weakened by travel, shame, and the stubborn love that had brought him to London. The physician had said rest, quiet, and no further agitation. London had answered with an invitation to judgment. Then I must reach Hampshire tonight, Verity said. If my mother kept something in that desk, we cannot wait. Sebastian's answer came too quickly. No, the word was not loud, but it struck with old authority. Verity looked at him. The Dowager did too. He saw both looks and corrected his tone, though not his decision. Not tonight. The roads will be poor after dark, your father is unwell, and Lady Bexham expects you to move in haste. That may be part of the trap. So we do nothing. We do not do foolish things because a cruel woman has chosen the hour. Foolish, Verity repeated softly. He closed his eyes for one brief moment, as if he heard the damage after it had been done. I did not mean you. No. Only my choice. The Dowager tapped her cane once. Sebastian. He looked at his aunt, then at Verity. I will send men to Hampshire with your key and instructions. Verity's hand moved to the ribbon at her throat. My key does not leave me. Then I will send for a locksmith. To force my mother's desk. Silence followed. It was not long. It did not need to be. Sebastian's jaw hardened, not against her, she thought, but against fear. That frightened her more. Fear made powerful men reach for familiar tools. His tools were speed, money, rank, command. Hers were patience, memory, and a brass key warmed by her own skin. Miss Elliston, he said, if the original is shown tomorrow night and we have not answered the accusation, your father's name may be fixed to this scandal beyond easy repair. Then let me go. I can protect you here. You can protect your house here. That is not the same thing. His face changed. The words had gone where she intended them to go, and she regretted the pain in them without regretting the truth. The Dowager rose. I am going to see whether Mr. Elliston is resting. I advise you both not to mistake volume for conviction in my absence. She left them with Mrs. Vale seated near the door, propriety present in plain black silk and discreet discomfort. Sebastian crossed to the writing table and took up Lady Bexham's note. There is another way. Verity did not like the quietness of his voice. What way? An announcement. Of what? He did not answer at once. That was enough. The room seemed to tilt back toward the first morning in Hampshire, toward papers laid on a table, toward a future arranged before she had been asked whether she could bear it. No, she said. You have not heard it. I have heard enough. Listen to me. Don't ask that of me while choosing not to listen in return. The contraction in her own voice made the sentence sharper, more human, less guarded than she wished. He flinched. Only slightly. If a formal engagement is announced before Lady Bexham presents the letter, the accusation loses force. Society may whisper that the match began awkwardly, but it will not be able to call you abandoned, bargaining, or exposed. I can enlarge the settlement openly, attach it to the engagement, and remove the suggestion of secret payment. Verity stared at him. You would answer a lie that I was bought by publishing a larger sum? I would answer ruin with security. You would confirm every cruel mouth in London. No. I would give them a fact they cannot destroy. A fact about your money. A fact about my intention. Your intention is not my consent. He set the note down. His control was beginning to crack, not into anger but into urgency. I am trying to prevent harm. So were you when you first came to Elliston Cottage. He went still. The sentence entered him. She saw it. He turned away, and for one moment he looked less like a duke than a man who had found the same locked door twice and still reached for the wrong key. A knock came at the sitting-room door. His secretary, Mr. Vale, entered with a leather portfolio tucked beneath his arm. The sight of it chilled Verity before anyone spoke. Your Grace, the secretary said, then stopped when he saw her. Sebastian's eyes closed briefly. Leave it. Mr. Vale hesitated. The notice is drafted, and the settlement revision can be copied within the hour. The room went silent. Mrs. Vale looked down at her lap as if witnessing an impropriety that no rulebook had named. Verity felt her face grow cold. Not hot. Cold. She walked to the table where the secretary had placed the portfolio. Sebastian moved, then stopped himself. Good. Let him stop. Let him learn the shape of his own mistake without being spared its edges. She opened the portfolio. The first page was an engagement notice, dignified, elegant, and unbearable. The second described a settlement large enough to silence debt, gossip, and perhaps any remaining person who had believed she could not be tempted. Her name sat there in beautiful ink, already joined to his, already arranged. When were you going to ask me? She said. The question was quiet. That made it worse. Sebastian did not answer quickly. Before anything was sent. After everything was prepared. Yes. Because you believed preparation would make refusal less likely. Because I feared delay would destroy you. No, she closed the portfolio carefully. You feared powerlessness. His eyes lifted to hers. There was no defense in them now. Only pain and a stubbornness not yet dead. I feared watching you suffer for my first error. Then stop making new ones in my name. The words left her trembling, though her hands remained still on the portfolio. You heard my father, Your Grace. You did not yet understand him. A fortune cannot wash away a price. It only makes the price louder. Mrs. Vale rose softly from her chair. Miss Elliston, shall I call the Dowager Duchess? Yes, please, Verity said. And ask whether her companion can be ready to travel within the hour. Sebastian took a step toward her. You cannot mean to leave now. I do. Your father will remain where he is safest, under your aunt's roof, with a physician and a duchess to frighten anyone foolish enough to disturb him. For the first time that day, something like a smile flickered through the hurt. It vanished at once. And you? He asked. I will go to Hampshire. I will open my mother's desk. I will find whatever Lady Bexham fears. I will not sit here while one woman dirties my father's name and one man who wishes to help me reaches for the very weapon that wounded me. Verity. It was the first time he had spoken her name without formality. It stopped her. Not because it was improper. Mrs. Vale was there. The door stood open. Nothing had been done that society could hang a scandal upon. It stopped her because his voice had changed. Not command. Not strategy. Fear, stripped clean. Don't go because I was a fool, he said. I'm going because I am not one. The dowager entered then, took in the open portfolio, Verity's face, Sebastian's silence, and understood enough to require no explanation. Mrs. Vale, she said, you will accompany Miss Elliston. Take my travelling cloak. It lends authority to anyone with shoulders. Sebastian looked at his aunt. You approve this? No, the dowager said. I respect it. There is a difference you would do well to study. Within the hour, Verity stood in the entrance hall with a small valise, the old key beneath her gown, and her father's blessing delivered from his bedchamber in a hand too unsteady to write more than one line. Bring back the truth, my dear girl. Sebastian came down the stairs as the footman opened the door. He had removed the engagement notice from the portfolio. In his hand, the paper was folded once, then again. "It will not be sent," he said. Verity nodded. "Good. I will follow with Price's clerk and my solicitor as soon as I have secured the papers here. Do not follow to lead." He accepted that like a sentence. "Then I will follow to stand where I am told." She wanted to believe him. Not fully. Enough for the road ahead, perhaps. Outside, the carriage waited under a darkening sky. Verity stepped into it with Mrs. Vale beside her. As the door closed, she looked once through the window. Sebastian stood beneath the lamps of Calder-mere House, holding the torn halves of the announcement he had almost made. It was not justice. Not yet. But it was the first time she had seen a powerful man destroy his own solution because it was not hers. The carriage moved toward Hampshire, away from the safety he had offered and toward the truth her mother had locked away. The lock had not been opened in 7 years, and for one terrible moment, Verity thought the key would fail her. It caught halfway, resisted, and held. The sound was small, only a dull scrape inside the walnut escritoire, but it seemed louder than every whisper London had sent after her. She stood in the parlour of Elliston Cottage with Mrs. Vale beside the door, a branch of candles burning low on the table, and the road dust of the journey still clinging to the hem of her grey silk. Outside, Hampshire lay under a cold evening mist. Inside, the little room smelled of extinguished fire, old paper, and the lavender sachets her mother had once tucked into every drawer as if fragrance could teach sorrow manners. "Miss Elliston?" Mrs. Vale said quietly. "Shall I send for Mrs. Armitage?" No. Verity forced her hand to steady. "Not yet." She turned the key again. This time, the mechanism yielded with a soft click. No trumpet sounded. No portrait fell from the wall. Nothing happened except that a daughter opened the place where her mother had kept the private remnants of a life. That was enough to make Verity close her eyes. "Mamma," she whispered, and because Mrs. Vale had the mercy to look away, Verity allowed herself one breath of weakness before she lifted the lid. The escritoire held neatly tied bundles, just as she remembered. Receipts. Household accounts in her mother's small hand. A packet of birthday notes Verity had written as a child, each spelling worse than the last. Beneath them lay a narrow drawer she had forgotten, fitted so closely into the wood that it looked like shadow. Verity pressed the catch. It sprang open. Inside was a blue silk ribbon, faded almost to grey, wrapped around a set of letters and a folded receipt bearing a seal she knew by reputation, not by affection. Bexham. Her pulse steadied. Fear had been replaced by direction. She carried the bundle to the table. Mrs. Vale came closer, proper concern wrestling with curiosity on her sensible face. "Is it what your father meant?" "I do not know." Verity untied the ribbon. "But my mother hid it from someone." The first letter was dated 15 years earlier, written from Bexham House to Mrs. Elliston. Lady Honoria Vale's hand had been elegant even then, long loops, confident strokes, the handwriting of a woman certain paper would obey her. The words were warm on the surface. Beneath the warmth lay arrangement. Honoria thanked Mrs. Elliston for entrusting the subscription funds and the small maternal trust connected to Verity's future to her temporary administration. She promised that when Mr. Elliston returned from the north and the legal forms were clarified, all monies would be restored. Verity read the passage twice. Then a third time. "There was money," she said. "Not much, perhaps, but money meant for me or Mamma." Lady Bexham held it. Mrs. Vale leaned in. "Does the receipt confirm it?" Verity unfolded the second paper. It did. The amount was not a fortune, but it was enough to matter. Enough to explain why an old debt might be revived to hide an older wrong. Enough to give a widow with a polished smile a reason to fear the Elliston papers. Beneath the receipt lay another letter, this one from Verity's mother to Lady Bexham. The tone was no longer warm. It was careful, wounded, and unmistakably brave. "You have delayed the return of the funds 3 times. My husband does not yet know the full matter, because I had hoped friendship would spare us unpleasantness. I ask you now, plainly, to restore what was never yours." Verity's throat tightened. Her mother had not been merely gentle. She had fought in ink because ink had been the weapon permitted to her. Verity touched the edge of the page as if touching a hand. Then she saw the date. The same date Lady Bexam's alleged letter claimed Mr. Elliston had written from London. The day her mother had died. No, Verity breathed. She reached for the copy Sebastian had obtained from the musicale, the few lines she had written down from memory after seeing Lady Bexam's page. Market value. Proper recognition. Acceptance. The phrases had disgusted her. Now they became evidence. She opened another bundle from the drawer and found a note from her father to her mother, written years before, when they had been happy enough for ordinary words to seem precious. The capital E in Elliston curved differently from the one on Lady Bexam's copy. His hand pressed lighter at the end of each line. He never wrote value as Lady Bexam's copy had shown it. Not once in the letters Verity unfolded. The forged hand had imitated shape and missed soul. Mrs. Vale, Verity said, her voice very calm. I need thread, sealing paper, and a dry cloth. These must be wrapped separately. Mrs. Vale was already moving. Of course. A sound came from outside. Wheels on the lane. Verity froze. It was too soon for Sebastian if he had only followed after securing his solicitor. Too late for a neighbor. Mrs. Vale crossed to the window and lifted the curtain a fraction. Her face changed. A small gig. One man driving. Not his grace. Verity gathered the papers at once. Not frantically. Carefully. Panic damaged evidence. Her mother had preserved these pages for years. Verity would not ruin them in fear. A knock came at the back door. Mrs. Armitage's voice sounded from the kitchen, sharp with suspicion. Another voice answered, oily and familiar enough to make Verity's skin prickle. Barker. The debt agent from the cottage gate. I was sent for a parcel left in error, he called. Papers belonging to Price and Wetherell. I have authority to collect them. Mrs. Vale looked at Verity. He knows. No, Verity said, sliding the Bexam receipt beneath her bodice and placing the letters inside the inner pocket of her cloak. He suspects. The parlor door opened before Barker could be kept out. Mrs. Armitage followed him, furious and flustered. I told him no gentleman was received through the kitchen. I am no gentleman today, Barker said. Only a messenger. His eyes went at once to the escritoire. Not to Verity. Not to the table. To the desk. That mistake condemned him. Mr. Barker, Verity said, you have a talent for entering rooms where you are not wanted. His smile was thin. And you have a talent for finding papers that may not belong to you. Mrs. Vale stepped forward. Miss Elliston is under the protection of the Dowager Duchess of Calder-mere. A companion's protest does not alter legal ownership. Nor does your presence establish it, Verity said. Leave. Barker's expression hardened beneath its politeness. Miss Elliston, you are not in London now. There are no chandeliers, no duchess, no duke at your elbow. It would be wiser to surrender any papers connected with the Bexam Trust before matters worsen. There it was. Bexam Trust. He had named it. Verity felt the first clean spark of triumph. Thank you, she said. Barker blinked. For what? For confirming which papers are important. His face tightened. He stepped toward the table. The sound of another carriage cut through the cottage before he could take a second step. Not a gig. A heavier carriage, fast, then stopping hard at the front. A door opened. Boots struck the path. The front entrance, this time. Properly. Mrs. Armitage almost smiled. Barker turned pale. Sebastian Harcourt entered the parlor less than a minute later with a solicitor behind him and road dust on his coat. His gaze took in the open escritoire, Verity's white face, Mrs. Vale by the table, and Barker near the papers. His voice was soft. Mr. Barker. Barker bowed too quickly. Your Grace. I was sent to retrieve property. By whom? I am not at liberty. That answer has disappointed me once already. Sebastian stepped aside, allowing the older gentleman behind him to enter. Mr. Havers, solicitor to Mr. Elliston, is now present. You may state your claim before him. Barker looked as if the floor had shifted. Mr. Havers, a spare man with tired eyes and a leather satchel, removed his gloves. I should be delighted to hear by what authority a debt agent attempts to seize family correspondence from my client's house. No one spoke. Barker swallowed. There may have been misunderstanding. There has, Verity said. She reached inside her cloak and withdrew the letters, one by one, laying them on the table before the solicitor. But not ours. Sebastian did not reach for them. He looked at her first. May I? 2 words. Such small words. Verity felt them more deeply than she wished to. Yes. He examined the receipt, then the dated letter from her mother, then the handwriting samples. With each page, his face lost more of its ducal mask and gained something harder. Not rage. Resolve. Tell me where to stand, he said quietly, so I do not stand in your way. Verity looked at him across her mother's papers, across all the harm his first offer had made possible and all the effort he was making not to repeat it. Beside the evidence, she said. Not in front of it. Then that is where I will be. Mr. Havers wrapped the documents with professional care and sealed them in his own satchel. Mrs. Vale wrote a brief account of Barker's attempted collection. Barker, now sweating despite the chill, was escorted to the lane by Sebastian's footman with instructions to report that the papers were in legal custody. When he was gone, the cottage seemed to exhale. Verity stood before the open escritoire, her fingers resting on the old key. The little desk had given up its secret. Her mother's voice had crossed years to answer a lie. We must return to London, Sebastian said. Lady Bexam's assembly has already begun. Verity closed the escritoire and locked it. This time, the click sounded like a promise. Then we must not keep her waiting. They left Hampshire with the evidence sealed in Mr. Havers's satchel and the old key hidden once more against Verity's heart. The carriage lanterns trembled over the road as if even the light had grown uncertain. Mrs. Vale sat beside Verity, gloved hands folded, lips moving now and again in silent prayer or disapproval. Across from them, Sebastian watched the darkening fields through the window, while Mr. Havers held the satchel on his knees with both arms, as though a titled widow might reach through the night and steal it from him. No one spoke for the first 4 miles. The rhythm of the wheels filled the silence, hard and hurried over ruts, softer when the road turned smooth beneath old trees. Verity should have felt triumph. She had found the papers. Her mother's warning had not been a memory softened by grief. It had been true. Yet truth, she was learning, did not end danger. It only gave danger something to fight. We will reach London after the assembly has begun, Mr. Havers said at last. If Lady Bexam means to make a display, she will have chosen her witnesses by now. That is precisely why she must be stopped before she has finished, Sebastian said. Verity looked at him. Stopped by whom? He turned from the window. By me. The answer was immediate. Too immediate. Mrs. Vale lowered her gaze. Mr. Havers adjusted the satchel. Verity felt the carriage become smaller around them. No, she said. Sebastian's brows drew together. Miss Elliston, this is not the music-hall. You have already done what was needed. You found the proof. Now let me present it. Why? Because Lady Bexam will use every courtesy in that room as a weapon. She will interrupt without seeming to interrupt. She will force you to defend your father while pretending concern for you. She will make cruelty sound like social duty. Yes, Verity said. I know. Then you know why I should stand between you and that room. I know why you want to. The distinction landed. He leaned forward slightly, the movement controlled but tense. This is not pride. Isn't it? No. It is protection. Protection that requires me to disappear at the moment my name is spoken. His mouth closed. Outside, the carriage swayed through a turn. The lantern light slipped over his face, showing exhaustion, worry, and the old habit of command fighting to dress itself in virtue. Verity had begun to recognize that habit. She recognized it because it was not born of contempt. It was born of fear, which made it harder to resist and more necessary. If men keep speaking truth for me, she said, then I remain the object of the sentence. First a bargain. Then a scandal. Then a cause. Sebastian looked down at his hands. They were gloved, still, and useless for the first time since she had known him. I do not want them to wound you again. They will. The bluntness steadied her. Lady Bexham will wound me whether I speak or not. The difference is whether I stand there as the person injured or the person answering. Mr. Havers cleared his throat gently. From a legal perspective, Miss Elliston's statement regarding her mother's papers may be useful. Sebastian gave him a look sharp enough to silence a lesser man. Mr. Havers did not retreat. Useful, Verity repeated. How encouraging. The solicitor flushed. Forgive me. I meant only that you have first-hand knowledge of the escritoire and the discovery. I understand. She turned back to Sebastian. Even your solicitor knows I am evidence. You are not evidence to me. His voice had changed. It was lower now, and stripped of its formal shield. No. No, then prove it by not placing me under glass. The carriage fell quiet again. The road noise filled the space where his answer should have been. Verity waited. She did not want obedience from him. She wanted comprehension. Obedience could be granted by pride for the sake of appearing noble. Comprehension cost more. At last he said, I have spent my life entering rooms where my word ended argument. I know how to use that. I do not always know what remains when I should not. Verity felt the old anger in her soften, not enough to vanish, but enough to breathe around. Then let this be what remains. You stand beside me. Not before me. He looked at her as if the words were simple and impossible at once. If they insult you, you may object if the insult becomes disorderly. If they accuse your father, I will answer first. If someone tries to take the papers, Mr. Havers tightened his arms around the satchel. Then you may become as ducal as you like, Verity said. For the first time that night, something almost like a smile touched Sebastian's mouth. It did not last, but it changed the air. I can manage that. I suspected you might. Mrs. Vale gave the smallest cough into her glove. It might have been approval. The carriage sped on. By the time they entered London, rain had begun, fine and silver, turning the streets slick beneath the lamps. The city had an unreal brightness after the dark country road. Windows glowed behind curtains. Carriages rolled past with crests painted on their doors and secrets carried inside. At Calder-mere House, they stopped only long enough for a footman to bring word from the Dowager. Lady Bexham's assembly was well attended. The Dowager and Mr. Elliston were already present, having gone to prevent the gathering from proceeding entirely under Honoria's control. Verity's heart lurched. Papa is there. Sebastian read the note again, his expression hardening. He insisted, according to my aunt. Of course he did. Fear tightened her throat, but beneath it came fierce tenderness. Her father could barely cross a hall without tiring, yet he had gone where his name was being weighed. Not for himself. For her. Sebastian looked at her. We can still decide that I enter first. No, Verity. There it was again. Her name. Less accidental now. More dangerous. She allowed herself to feel it for one breath and no longer. Your Grace. He accepted the correction in public space. A footman stood near the door. Mrs. Vale was gathering her cloak. Mr. Havers was preparing the satchel. Propriety had ears. So did fear. Sebastian lowered his voice. Whatever happens tonight, you owe me nothing. The sentence entered her quietly. It was not a proposal. Not a bargain. Not even a promise, exactly. It was a release. For that reason, it reached deeper than any vow might have done. Verity held his gaze. Then I can trust what you give. He looked as if the answer struck him harder than praise. They changed carriages for the shorter drive to Bexham House, taking the Dowager's dark town coach because its crest would clear the entrance without delay. Mr. Havers sat forward, reviewing the order of documents. First the dated letter from Mrs. Elliston. Then the receipt. Then the handwriting samples. The trust correspondence after that. We must not begin with accusation. We begin with chronology. Lady Bexham will try to break chronology with emotion, Sebastian said. She will call it vulgar to discuss accounts before ladies, Verity said. She will say my mother misunderstood. She will pity Papa. She will forgive me in public for sins I did not commit. Mrs. Vale looked at her with startled respect. You know her methods very well for so short an acquaintance. Women like Lady Bexham rely upon other women being too polite to name what is happening. Sebastian's eyes rested on her. And you? Verity touched the key beneath her gown. I have been polite long enough. Bexham House came into view, blazing with candles behind tall windows. The rain had softened to mist, but the pavement shone black beneath the lamps. A line of carriages waited outside, their drivers hunched against the damp. Music did not sound from within. That was worse. This was not entertainment now. It was judgment. The footman opened the coach door. For a moment, no one moved. Then Verity drew her cloak around her shoulders and stepped down before Sebastian could offer his hand. Not because she rejected him. Because her knees needed to learn the ground by themselves. He came beside her a moment later. Not ahead. Beside. Mr. Havers followed with the satchel. Mrs. Vale stayed close enough to satisfy every rule London cared to invoke. At the top of the steps, the door opened before they knocked. Warm air flowed out, carrying candle wax, damp wool, and the faint perfume of too many people waiting for something unkind. A servant took their names, but his voice shook before he finished. His Grace the Duke of Calder-mere. Miss Elliston. Mr. Havers. The corridor beyond seemed longer than architecture required. At its end, double doors stood closed. Behind them, Verity heard Lady Bexham's voice, smooth as cream poured over poison. I ask only that the truth be faced with compassion. Sebastian's hand moved slightly at his side, then stilled. He looked at Verity, waiting. There was the test. Not in speeches. Not in apologies. In a closed door, a crowded room, and a powerful man who could open it for her or over her. Verity nodded once. Now, she said. Sebastian did not step in front of her. He reached for the handle, opened the door, and stood aside. Lady Bexham turned with the original letter in her hand. The room fell silent. Verity walked in first. Every face in Lady Bexham's drawing-room turned toward Verity as if she had entered not through a door but through the center of the accusation itself. The room was too warm, crowded with candles, silk, damp cloaks, and curiosity dressed as concern. Chairs had been arranged in an unnatural half-circle around the hearth, giving the gathering the appearance of a polite tribunal while pretending to be an assembly of friends. The Dowager Duchess stood near the mantel, one hand on her silver cane, her expression carved from ice. Mr. Elliston sat in a chair at her side, pale but upright, his dignity made more painful by the visible effort it cost him. Lady Rosalind remained near the pianoforte, hands clasped tightly before her. She looked first at Verity, then at the letter in her aunt's hand, and shame crossed her face before she lowered her eyes. Lady Bexham recovered first. Of course she did. Her smile returned with delicate sorrow, as if Verity had interrupted an act of mercy. Miss Elliston, she said. How unfortunate that you should arrive at such a moment. Verity walked forward until she stood inside the circle of light. Sebastian came no farther than her shoulder, exactly beside her, close enough that his presence settled the room and far enough that no one could claim he had pushed her forward. Mr. Havers stood behind with the satchel. Mrs. Vale remained near the door, a proper witness in plain black. It would be more unfortunate, Verity said, if I had arrived after it. A few ladies shifted. Lady Bexham's fingers tightened on the paper, then relaxed. We were merely seeking clarity. Then I am grateful to have come while clarity is still welcome. The Dowager Duchess made no sound, but Verity felt her approval from across the room like a held candle. Lady Bexham turned to the assembled guests. You see how distressing this has become. I had hoped to spare Miss Elliston a public explanation. Indeed, I had hoped to spare everyone. But when a document touches upon the honor of a gentleman, the reputation of a young lady, and the judgment of a duke, one cannot simply bury it because the truth is painful. That's an admirable sentiment, Sebastian said. I look forward to seeing you apply it. The words cut cleanly through the room. Lady Bexham's smile thinned. Your Grace mistakes my discomfort for hostility. No, he said. I have not mistaken you for some time. A murmur rose and died. Verity did not look at him. If she did, she might lose the fragile steadiness she had gathered mile by mile from Hampshire to London. Lady Bexham lifted the letter. Very well. Since Miss Elliston has chosen to be present, I shall read only the passage necessary. All of it, Verity said. Lady Bexham paused. I beg your pardon. If my father's name is to be used, let the whole paper bear the light. Not merely the lines you prefer. The room stilled. Lady Bexham inclined her head, accepting the challenge because refusing it would reveal too much. She unfolded the letter fully. Her voice was smooth when she began, softer than public cruelty should ever be. To the party acting in the interest of His Grace, the Duke of Calder-mere. I write with regard to my daughter, Verity Elliston, whose acceptance of any proposal must be treated with proper recognition of her market value, given the dignity of our name and the disadvantages of our present position. Verity felt the words strike her father. She did not turn. If she saw his face, she might cross the room and forget why she had come. Lady Bexham continued, should His Grace wish the matter concluded without further difficulty, the sum discussed must be increased, and assurances given regarding Elliston Cottage. Affection is not the point. Security is. A daughter cannot be expected to surrender herself to a household, however noble, without the father receiving what is due. A hiss of discomfort moved through the ladies. Not because they believed it fully. Because some part of them wanted to. It made the world simpler if reduced people were grasping, if poor fathers were secretly mercenary, if a woman's humiliation could be explained by her own family's ambition. Lady Bexham lowered the paper. I will not read more. It pains me. How selective your pain is, the dowager said. Lady Bexham ignored her. She looked at Verity with luminous pity. My dear, you must understand, no one here wishes to condemn you for a father's desperation. Verity heard Sebastian inhale. She knew he was near the edge of speech. She turned her head just enough to meet his eyes. Wait. The word did not pass her lips, but he understood it. His jaw tightened. He remained silent. That silence gave her courage. Verity faced the room. May I answer? An elderly matron near the tea table gave a small laugh. Answer what, Miss Elliston? Whether a better price has now been named? Sebastian moved then. Only one step. The matron shrank back as if rank itself had crossed the carpet. Verity raised her hand slightly. No, Your Grace. He stopped. The matron flushed. Verity looked at her directly. I will answer whether my father wrote those words. He did not. Lady Bexham sighed. Loyalty is touching. Evidence is better. Mr. Havers came forward at that signal and placed the satchel on a side table. He did not open it yet. Verity had asked to speak first. He honored that. The letter Lady Bexham holds is dated the 19th of October, 1802, Verity said. That date was not chosen carelessly. It was chosen because old correspondence from my family bears that year often enough to make the hand seem plausible. But the day was chosen by someone who did not know our house. Lady Bexham's expression did not change. What an elaborate suggestion. On the 19th of October, 1802, my mother died. The room went still. Verity felt the shock pass through it, but she did not let it slow her. My father was not in London. He was not writing to intermediaries. He was at Elliston Cottage, beside the woman he loved. The parish record confirms the date. So does the household account. So do letters written by neighbours who came to sit with us. Mr. Elliston made a small sound behind her. This time, she did turn. His eyes shone, but he did not bow his head. He gave her one faint nod. Continue. She did. Second, my father does not use the phrase market value. He never has. In the letters preserved by my mother, he wrote of duty, provision, affection, and obligation. Never value as a price for a living soul. Lady Bexham's mouth tightened. A daughter cannot know every word her father has ever written. No. But a forgery often knows too little. A whisper ran around the room. Verity saw Lady Rosalind look sharply at her aunt. Third, Verity said, the capital E in the signature is imitated from an older family letter. It curves more heavily than my father's natural hand. The pressure at the end of each line is wrong. The copied letter at your musicale showed the same defect. Lady Bexham laughed softly. Miss Elliston, are we now to have lessons in penmanship? If penmanship was used to dishonor my father, yes. The answer struck harder than Verity expected. A few women looked away from Lady Bexham. Sir Malcolm Teague, standing near the bookcase, shifted from one foot to the other. He had enjoyed the scandal when it was amusing. It was less amusing now that it had begun to require courage. Lady Bexham turned to Sebastian. Your Grace, surely you will not allow this painful display to continue. Miss Elliston is distressed. Miss Elliston is speaking, he said. There is a difference. For a brief second, Verity could not breathe. Not because she needed rescue. Because he had understood the exact thing she had asked him to understand. Lady Bexham saw it too, and something bitter flashed behind her courtesy. Then let her finish. Gladly, Verity said. Mr. Havers opened the satchel. Before he could remove the first document, Sir Malcolm stepped forward with unwise eagerness. Perhaps the papers should be examined by someone neutral. His hand reached toward the table. Sebastian intercepted him without haste. He did not touch him. He merely placed himself between Sir Malcolm and the satchel, and suddenly the gentleman remembered the distance between a baronet's consequence and a duke's displeasure. You will not handle those documents, Sebastian said. Mr. Havers is solicitor to Mr. Elliston. My own solicitor has also examined the seals. If neutrality is required, it will not be supplied by a man who laughed at an anonymous note before asking whether it was true. Sir Malcolm went red. Your Grace, I didn't mean you rarely do. That is the difficulty. A painful silence followed. Then Mr. Havers removed the first paper. This is a letter from the late Mrs. Elliston to Lady Honoria Vale, dated the same month and year as the disputed letter. It concerns funds held in trust. Lady Bexham's face changed by less than an inch. Verity saw it. So did the Dowager. So did Lady Rosalind, whose hand rose to her throat. That correspondence is private, Lady Bexham said. So was the letter you read aloud, the Dowager replied. Privacy seems to trouble you only when it belongs to others. Mr. Havers laid the document on the table but kept one gloved hand near it. There is more, he said. The letter Lady Bexham read is not the only paper relevant to this matter. In fact, it appears her ladyship has omitted the one document most necessary to the truth. Lady Bexham went perfectly still. Verity felt the room turn with her toward the solicitor. The accusation had found its hinge. Mr. Havers reached into the satchel again and withdrew a folded receipt bearing the Bexham seal. His voice, when he spoke, was calm enough to be merciless. This receipt proves that money belonging to Mrs. Elliston was placed under Lady Bexham's temporary administration and was never returned. The receipt lay on the table like a quiet thing with a louder voice than everyone in the room. No one reached for it. Even Lady Bexham, who had built an evening upon the assumption that other people would tremble before paper, did not move her hand. Mr. Havers adjusted his spectacles and continued with the merciless calm of a man who understood that facts did not need ornament when cruelty had already supplied enough drama. The funds described here were not charitable subscriptions alone. They included a small trust connected to Mrs. Elliston's marriage settlement, held temporarily during a dispute over signatures after her illness. Lady Honoria Vale acknowledged receipt. She promised return. Lady Bexham's colour had changed beneath the powder at her cheeks. This is a gross distortion. The Dowager Duchess lifted her cane half an inch from the carpet. Then do not distort it further. A strained sound passed through the assembled guests. It might have been shock. It might have been fear, because the room had begun to understand that sympathy had been misdirected and that they had been invited not to witness truth, but to help bury it. Verity stood very still. She had thought triumph might feel warm. It did not. It felt cold and clean, like water drawn from a deep well. Mr. Havers unfolded the next document. This letter, written by the late Mrs. Elliston, requests the return of the funds and states that Lady Bexham had delayed repayment 3 times. It also states that Mr. Elliston did not yet know the full matter, because Mrs. Elliston hoped to resolve it privately. Mr. Elliston bowed his head, not in shame now, but in grief. Verity turned toward him at once. He looked older than he had that morning, but his eyes were clear. Her mother had carried that burden alone. Her father was learning it in a room full of strangers. The cruelty of that nearly undid Verity, yet he gave her another small nod. Continue. So she remained standing. Lady Bexham gave a soft laugh, but it broke before it became convincing. A nervous woman's misunderstanding from years ago is a poor foundation on which to accuse me. No one accused you at first, Sebastian said. His voice carried without effort. You chose accusation. You gathered witnesses. You read a letter meant to make a decent man appear mercenary and his daughter purchasable. Lady Bexham turned on him with a flash of real anger. You speak of decency while dragging private accounts before ladies. You dragged a woman's reputation before them first. Silence. It struck the room harder than any shout. Lady Rosalind stepped away from the pianoforte, her face pale with humiliation that was not hers but had been placed upon her by blood. Aunt, she whispered, is it true? Lady Bexham did not look at her. That refusal answered more brutally than confession. Mr. Havers laid out the handwriting samples next, each weighted carefully beneath a paper knife. The disputed letter uses a signature copied from older correspondence. The pressure is inconsistent. The date is impossible. The wording is unlike Mr. Elliston's known hand and manner. The phrase that caused greatest injury appears nowhere in his letters, but one similar phrase appears in an account note written by Lady Bexham's former clerk. A murmur rose. Sir Malcolm Teague went red to the roots of his hair. Mrs. Penrose covered her mouth, not from compassion but from the dawning horror of having chosen the wrong side too publicly. Lady Bexham lifted her chin. Clerks borrow phrases. Servants misplace papers. Gentlemen forget what they have written when poverty embarrasses them. Mr. Elliston rose. Verity moved toward him, but he held up one hand. It shook, yet he stood. Sebastian also moved, then stopped when Verity did. The whole room watched an old gentleman gather what illness and humiliation had not taken from him. No, Mr. Elliston said. His voice was not strong, but it was clear. My daughter was never for sale. The words entered the room and changed its center. They did not beg. They did not explain. They judged. Verity pressed her lips together until she could trust herself not to weep. Lady Bexham's mouth tightened. How noble poverty sounds when a duke stands ready to reward it. Sebastian took one step forward. This time Verity did not stop him, because the insult was no longer aimed only at her. It was aimed at truth itself. Enough, he said. Lady Bexham looked almost relieved to have anger from him. Anger could be called passion. Authority could be called bullying. What she met instead was worse for her. He was calm. You will deliver the original letter to Mr. Havers tonight. You will also provide all correspondence concerning the Bexham Trust by tomorrow noon. My solicitor will join his inquiry. Any claim against Mr. Elliston connected to those funds will be challenged in writing and publicly corrected. You cannot command my private affairs. No, Sebastian said. But I can withdraw Calder-mere's name, houses, patronage, introductions, and influence from every room that protects yours. Lady Bexham went very still. The Dowager Duchess smiled then, and it was a terrible thing. You may consider my drawing-room closed to you, Honoria. I shall be certain no one mistakes the reason. Chairs shifted. Fans lowered. A social execution could be quiet and still leave no doubt that the blade had fallen. Lady Rosalind's eyes filled, but she turned toward Verity instead of toward her aunt. Miss Elliston, I'm sorry. I should have questioned it sooner. Verity looked at her and saw not an enemy, but another woman trained to sit gracefully beside someone else's ambition. Then question sooner next time, she said. Lady Rosalind nodded as if she had been given both rebuke and mercy, and perhaps she had. Lady Bexham's face hardened. You will all regret humiliating me over a provincial nobody with a pretty story." Sebastian's expression did not change. "Miss Elliston did not humiliate you. She answered you." He turned then, not to Lady Bexham, but to the room. It was the first time Verity had seen him use all his rank without hiding behind it. "Let there be no confusion by morning. Mr. Elliston refused my first offer because he understood something I did not. I came to his house believing money could solve what only character had the right to ask. He told me his daughter needed a good man, not a rich one." The words reached Verity with such force that the room blurred for 1 second. He did not look away from the witnesses. He was right. "I was rich when I entered that parlor. I was not yet worthy. If I ever ask for Miss Elliston's hand again, it will not be because I have purchased peace, silenced gossip, or rescued her from a scandal that my own arrogance helped shape. It will be because I have learned to stand where she asked me to stand." No one breathed loudly. Verity felt the old key against her heart, warmed by her skin, and understood that some doors opened not because one forced them, but because someone finally stopped pushing. Lady Bexham tried one last time. How touching. The poor girl has managed ambition very prettily after all. The dowager struck her cane on the floor. "Leave my sight, Honoria." It was not shouted. It was worse. Lady Bexham looked around and found no face eager to protect her. Sir Malcolm studied the carpet. Mrs. Penrose turned away. Lady Rosalind stepped aside, removing even the comfort of family alignment. At last Lady Bexham folded what remained of herself into a curtsy so rigid it looked painful. "This matter is not ended." "No," Mr. Havers said, closing his satchel. "It is now properly begun." She left the room with her head high and her power visibly diminished. The door closed behind her. Only then did sound return, low and broken. The dowager crossed to Mr. Elliston and offered him her arm as if he were a prince instead of a tired gentleman with a slandered name. "Sir, my carriage will take you home when you are ready." "Your Grace," he said, voice thick, "you honor me. I am correcting an error in the room. Do not make me sentimental." Verity almost smiled through the ache in her chest. Sebastian approached her, but stopped at a careful distance. "Miss Elliston." She looked at him. The room still watched, but for once she did not feel displayed. She felt seen. "Your Grace, I will not ask anything of you tonight." "No. No. I would like permission to call tomorrow. Properly. With your father present. And only if you wish it." The request was quiet enough to be private and formal enough to be safe. It gave her room. It gave her choice. Verity looked toward her father, who had heard and whose eyes held sorrow, pride, and the faintest trace of approval. Then she looked back at Sebastian. "You may walk me to the carriage tonight," she said. His breath changed. "And tomorrow?" She allowed herself the smallest smile. "Tomorrow depends on whether you remember how to ask." For the first time since Hampshire, the room's silence did not feel like judgment. It felt like release. Lady Bexham's forged letter remained on the table, stripped of power. Verity passed it without touching it. Her father's name had been spoken cleanly. Her mother's warning had been heard. And beside her, not in front of her, the Duke of Calder-mere offered his arm as if it were not a claim, but a promise waiting for permission. 3 months after Lady Bexham left her own drawing-room with every candle still burning against her defeat, Verity Elliston stood in the morning room of Calder-mere House and watched London learn the shape of respect. It came not as applause. Respect rarely did, when it was late. It came in lowered voices, deeper curtsies, carefully phrased apologies, and calling cards sent by women who had once found her misfortune entertaining enough to repeat. Mrs. Penrose came first with both daughters and a face arranged into penitence. She spoke of misunderstanding, confusion, the danger of trusting incomplete accounts, and the sorrow of seeing a young lady so wronged. Verity listened without malice and without gratitude. When Mrs. Penrose paused, plainly waiting to be forgiven in a manner comfortable to herself, Verity said, "You were not confused. You were curious. There is a difference." The elder daughter flushed. The younger looked at Verity as if she had just heard a bell rung in a room where everyone else had agreed to whisper. Mrs. Penrose bowed her head. You're quite right, Miss Elliston. I'm sorry. That was better. Not complete, but better. The Dowager Duchess, seated by the fire with her silver cane across her lap, observed the exchange with open satisfaction. Progress, she said after the callers left. London has discovered shame. It will be insufferably proud of itself by dinner. Verity smiled. The smile came more easily now. Not because the wound had vanished, but because it had closed cleanly. Lady Bexham's name had disappeared from invitation lists with a speed that would have impressed a military strategist. The matter of the withheld trust had moved from whispered rooms to solicitors' offices, where paper no longer performed for sympathy and ink had to tell the truth in sequence. Mr. Havers had recovered enough documentation to restore the funds to Verity's name, with interest pursued through channels Lady Bexham could neither charm nor intimidate. Sir Malcolm Teague had written an apology so stiff it nearly creaked. Lady Rosalind had sent one without ornament and had later called alone, pale but determined, to say she intended to live with an aunt in Bath until she could learn who she was when she was not being arranged for someone else's ambition. Verity had wished her courage. She meant it. By then, Mr. Elliston was no longer in the Blue Chamber at Calder-mere House. He had been moved, at his own insistence and Sebastian's careful invitation, to Alderwick Park for country air. He had accepted only after Sebastian wrote, in his own hand, that the invitation was not charity, strategy, or obligation, but the honor due to the father of a woman he hoped one day to ask properly. Mr. Elliston had shown the letter to Verity with eyes too bright for teasing and said, "He improves with practice." Now, on a clear afternoon in early summer, Verity stepped down from the Calder-mere carriage before Alderwick Park and felt the old fear fail to rise. The estate spread across the green Warwickshire countryside with terraces, lawns, ancient oaks, and a long honey-coloured house that had watched centuries of Harcourts be born, marry, quarrel, and die. Once, such a house would have seemed to ask what right she had to approach it. Now she knew better than to answer stone. Sebastian waited at the foot of the steps, not in formal black but in a dark blue coat that softened the severity of him without making him any less himself. He bowed over her gloved hand with the restraint that had become dearer to her than gallantry. "Miss Elliston." "Your Grace." His eyes warmed. "Your father is in the south garden, arguing with my steward about pear trees. Then he is recovering. The steward may not." She laughed, and the sound moved between them with the ease of something once impossible. 4 months, he had courted her properly. Morning calls with her father present. Walks with Mrs. Vale or the Dowager in sight. Letters sent openly, never pressed for answer. No settlement papers. No grand declarations offered in place of patience. He had asked about her mother, her childhood, her opinions, her dislikes, and the books she had pretended not to love because new books cost money. He had learned when to speak and, more importantly, when not to. Love had not arrived like lightning. It had gathered, quiet and certain, in the spaces where he made room for her. They found Mr. Elliston exactly where Sebastian had promised, seated in the south garden beneath a clipped-yew, a rug over his knees and a gardener listening with the strained respect of a man being instructed by someone who knew very little about pears and cared deeply about being useful. When he saw Verity, his face softened. "My dear girl. His Grace has been allowing me to terrorize the grounds." "I encouraged it," Sebastian said. "Alderwick has survived worse than honest advice." Mr. Elliston looked from one to the other. Something knowing entered his expression. "Then I shall inspect the roses with the gardener." Slowly. At a distance. "Papa," Verity said, half warning, half tenderness. "My dear, I am old, not blind." He took the gardener's arm and moved away with theatrical dignity. Sebastian did not speak until her father was beyond easy hearing. Even then, he did not rush. He walked with her along the gravel path to a small garden room set into the wall, where climbing jasmine had begun to open in the sun. Inside stood a carved cabinet of pale wood, newly placed, its brass lock shining. On a nearby table lay a folded paper tied with the old ribbon Verity had once worn around her neck. She knew that ribbon. Her hand went instinctively to the key now hanging openly at her throat on a fine chain, no longer hidden beneath fabric. Sebastian saw the motion. "I had the cabinet made for you," he said. Not for jewels. Not unless you wish it. For whatever you choose to keep safe. Verity looked at the folded paper. And that? The unsigned settlement from the morning I first came to Elliston Cottage. Her breath caught softly. You kept it? Yes. At first because I meant to correct it. Then because I needed to remember it. He faced her fully. Verity, I came to your house believing I could arrange a life with the same efficiency with which I arranged an estate account. Your father saw me more clearly than I saw myself. So did you. I cannot undo the insult of that first offer, but I can spend the rest of my life honoring the lesson. The garden beyond the open door was bright with summer. Somewhere in the distance, her father laughed at something the gardener had said. Verity stood very still, feeling the old key against her palm. Sebastian. His name changed him. She had used it only twice before, both times in letters. Hearing it aloud made his composure tremble. I love you, he said. Not because you needed rescue. You never did. Not because scandal made you visible. You were always visible to anyone worth trusting. I love you because you stand in truth even when the room is arranged against you, and because when I lost my way, you did not make your heart smaller to fit my mistake. He drew a breath. Will you build a life with me? No papers lay between them now. No fortune glittered as argument. No room waited to judge her answer. Only a man, humbled enough to ask, and a woman free enough to choose. Verity felt tears rise, but they did not shame her. Yes, she said. But not because you are a duke. His smile came slowly, breaking through restraint like sunlight through cloud. No. No, she placed the old key in his hand for one moment, then closed his fingers around it. Because you learned not to use power where trust was needed. He bowed his head over her hand, and when he returned the key, he did it as if returning a vow. Later, with Mr. Elliston's blessing given in a voice that failed only once, the old cabinet was opened for the first time. Verity placed the unsigned settlement inside, tied with the ribbon that had once held the key beneath her gown. Beside it, she laid a copy of her mother's restored trust receipt and one pressed sprig of jasmine from the garden wall. Then she turned the key. The lock clicked softly. It no longer sounded like something being hidden. It sounded like something being kept. Outside, Alderwick Park glowed in the late afternoon, and Sebastian stood beside her, not before her, not above her, but beside her, exactly where she had asked him to stand.